What's up, YouTube? We are live on Twitch right now for the full set review speed run. You know, we know what were all these pleasantries? What are all these pleasantries? Let's look at some cards, man. With a quick caveat. First of all, I'm going to do this on Scryfall. I don't know if you hate it or not. I'm so sorry. So I really just tell you that to apologize in advance. But it's kind of difficult to do it any other way and actually speed run it. So that's what we're going to do. And my second apology is I'm going to be covering up some card art just a little bit. That's okay. I love you. So, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So let's get into it. We are on a scale of 0 to 10 again tonight. A lot of you seem to really like when I buffed it up from 0 to 5 to 0 to 10. So we're going to kind of keep it in that realm tonight. And that's about it. We're mostly rating for competitive play, some commander all around, right? But mostly competitive and not limited, but we will point out good limited cards when we get there. I love you all. First things first, let's take a quick sippy. Let's take a couple of sippies. Got some coffee over here. Got a little bit of watermelon Kool-Aid over here just to bring some tart into my life. Thank you very much. God, that's actually a fantastic combination. I don't know why coffee and Kool-Aid aren't a thing. Everyone does. But anyway, we're also going to have one quick moment before I get in of centering. And I suggest that you take that moment to do the very same thing for yourself, because I'm going to try to somehow paradoxically go slower while going faster tonight. Can we do that? Can we make it a more pleasant experience for everybody? Let's take a quick moment to... All right, let's go. Bloomburrow speed run. Here we are. First card in the set, Banishing Light. Okay, so I think this is actually a really, really good baseline. Banishing Light. I think it's basically the average card. It's a decent removal spell while not being like too narrow or crappy of a removal spell, while not being too busted of a removal spell. It's just basically where you want a magic card to be in terms of like the exact average. So I think we give Banishing Light a 5. I think we actually do that. I think it's a perfect 5. Beza, the Bounding Spring. This is a good magic card. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for the 4/5 legendary elemental elk. When it enters, you create a treasure if an opponent controls more lands than you. You're going to gain 4 life if an opponent has more life than you. You get 2/1/1 blue fishies if an opponent controls more creatures than you, and you draw a card if they have more cards in hand than you. So this is always going to do like a thing, you know, and it might do 2 things. Of super rare occasions, it may do more than that. But in Commander, it has more of a chance of doing all the things. But I still think in 1v1, this could be a very real magic card. I really do. I think this is one of the better white creatures in the set. Maybe one of the better white creatures in Standard. Doesn't have Death Touch, so it doesn't really come up against Sheoldreds very well, even though it too is a 4 mana 4/5. It really kind of needs the Death Touch. But I think in enough matches against a large variety of decks, this does enough stuff that, like, if it's sort of in a white mid-range deck as the 4-drop, then it's doing a ton of work for you. So I'm going to give this card a 7.65. I think is a pretty good score for it. You know, pretty high, yes. But I do expect this is going to do work in Standard. If not like right now, then maybe after the next rotation, because the card has a long time to actually perform. So I expect this to be one of the better white cards in the set for Standard play specifically. Moving on, though, to Bravekin Duo. A single white mana for a 1/1 rabbit mouse. This you can pay a mana, tap it, and another thing gets +1/+1 at sorcery speed. Not a great magic card. Let's give this a 2.2. There might be reasons why you'd want both rabbit and mouse in limited, or even constructed, but mostly in limited. This has a decent spread of creature types for, like, making sure you can actually do stuff, you know, on curve. The set wants you to have 1-drops even in limited, so... you know, you'll actually draft this from time to time. So 2.25, something like that. Bright Blade Stoat up next. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Weasel Soldier with First Strike and Lifelink. This is actually just a solid magic card. Back in the day, if this was like a knight in 5th edition, we'd have been like, oh, okay, pretty good, you know. So I can't hate this magic card, but I'm not sure that it's quite on the level that it needs to be anymore. If you do look at the white 1-drops, or 2-drops rather, that we have access to in Standard after rotation, this is maybe the 3rd or 5th best one. If you really look at them, some of them are like highly specialized. They care about soldiers or humans, Coppercoat, Vanguard, Valiant Veteran, whatever. And in terms of just like good in a vacuum 1-drop or 2-drops, why am I doing that? 2-drops that don't, you know, need any sort of synergy to go with them. This is actually kind of up there. So I like it, but I just don't think it's great for standard or anything. So I'll also give this card a 5, just right neutral, right out of 5. Builder's Talent is next. This is the class that costs 2 mana and gives you a 0/4 when it comes into play. For just 1 mana, you can level this up to level 2. And then whenever one or more non-creature, non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a guy that you control. For level 3, it costs 5 mana, and when it becomes level 3, you return a non-creature, non-land permanent from your yard to the field. So pretty cool that it can get back, planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts. There's a lot of ways you can use this last ability to generate mana value, which you really don't see with a lot of these classes. You know what I mean? So I actually do kind of like this a good bit. I love how cheap the second mode is. That's something else you don't always see on these, even though you do see it on the very next one. I don't know. I kind of do like Builder's Talent, but do I think it's destined to be, an amazing card in Standard? No, not quite. So I think I'm going to give this something like a 5.81, right? Just slightly above average. So I do think it has cool things it can do. Now, Caretaker's Talent over here, this is a class, so I won't cover it up. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a class, and whenever one or more tokens you control enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So that's a pretty good ability, but this too you can level up for just a single white, and when it becomes level 2, you create a token that's a copy of a token that you control. For 4 mana, level 3 is creature tokens you control get +2/+2. This is kind of interesting with a lot of the token making stuff that we have, not just in white, but in Standard at large, right? I think it's kind of neat with like the Planeswalker Nissa that makes like a token equal to the number of like lands you control or whatever it is. That's a neat token to copy. Also neat to copy tokens in like the Synthesizer deck, but I'm not sure that this really goes in either of those like prospective piles. I do kind of like it with the White Virtue that makes a 2/2 for 2 mana. Because for just 1 mana, copying that token is pretty sweet, and drawing a card off of it is cool too. So this has been kind of the going rate for white enchantments that draw cards over the last few sets, and this is just better than most of those. Just because it has extra gravy, it's better than those. It's also got kind of a game-breaking sort of late mode if you have enough tokens. So even if you just have like 3-4 tokens, it's pretty good late mode. So also one thing I need to point out is that like it doesn't need to have creature tokens enter. Just like a clue or a food can enter and you draw a card, and that is phenomenal. It's really, really good. So Caretaker's Talent might be slightly better than it looks to some eyes. I think it's a really good Magic card, and I'm going to give it a 7.5. There's probably some Commander play ahead of it if nothing else. Carrot Cake is up next. This is the 2 mana artifact that when it enters, it's a food, by the way, so you can sack it, gain the 3 life. But when it enters and when you sack it, you get a 1/1 rabbit, and you scry 1. Actually pretty good in terms of value. Really not bad. I could see a deck or two kind of like finding a use for this every now and again. So pretty good. I'll give this like a 5.9, something like that. Again, I think it might find a home every now and again. I want to say it's delicious, but this is not what I ordered. Dawn's Truce is up next. 2 mana, 1 and a white, gift a card. You and permanent you control gain hexproof till end of turn. If the gift was promised, permanent you control also gain indestructible till end of turn. So I could have just called this the heroic intervention in white that's in this set. This is just 2 mana, like counter a removal spell or counter a giant fireball to the face, like a World Soul's Rage. So that could matter. But gifting the card just makes it heroic intervention, and I think this is fantastic. I really do. Again, lots of Commander play, I think, forever and ever, and that does affect your score. But in Standard, this is at the very least a sideboard card, and I think it could be much more than that, even a main deck card. Because, this can at least trigger Prowess and trigger, Slick Shot, right? And like give it the hexproof for a turn too. So that's kind of important. And there's just a lot, I think, that this can do in like various decks. So whether it comes out of the board or whether it's just always in your deck because you need to like have these removal counter spells. So excellent card. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm going to give this an 8.3, something like that. I really think this is phenomenal. It's absolutely great. And again, in Commander, it gets even better where you can, gift somebody else the card that's not even like casting the thing that's hurting you. You know what I mean? So that's just a really, really good Magic card, man. I think that's obvious. Dewdrop Cure up next. This is 2 and a white for a sorcery. You can gift a card. Now, you return up to 2 creature cards, each with mana value 2 or less from your yard to the battlefield. But if you promise to gift, you get 3 of those mana value 2 or less guys instead. This is a sleeper-ish kind of card, but I don't even know if I can call it that anymore because a lot of people have called out some of the things you can do with it, especially Kroxa. A lot of people keep saying, get back the 2 mana 6/6 Croxa with this. That like makes them discard a card and all that. Yeah, that's a great use. You can get back multiple Croxas with it. That's great. But there's tons of great 2-drops, especially 2-drops in decks that are effectively, combo decks that need a couple of different things in place. Or at the very least, they're really synergy-driven decks. They have engines that they need on the table. And this is pretty good for that. 3 mana is really good, It effectively generates mana value, even if you don't gift a card. And if you do gift a card, it generates a ton, double the mana value you put into it. So if you've set up your graveyard correctly, yes, I think you're doing phenomenal things, man. Like, not just in, these combo decks, like I mentioned, Elisol Core, I've mentioned a couple times in this season. And not just Croxa and stuff like that, but all kinds of stuff. We see kind of an Abzan build cooking up right now for the Graveyard Matters deck, where you have like Stick Fingers, who I think is rotating, but you've got other cards like Somnophage and Souls of the Lost, I think it's called, that care about how many dudes are in your yard. And Dewdrop Cure gets both of those guys back. So, it could help too. Just lots of interesting stuff you could like cook up with this card. So I'm going to love stuff like this every time I see it. I'll give it a 7, and I think that's high, but I do think this card does have some work ahead of it. I do. But Driftbloom Coyote is up next. This is just the 5 mana thing that's, it exiles a guy until it leaves the battlefield. There's some extra gravy on it, but who really cares? It's a decent removal creature in Limited. I will say that, where there aren't all the options in the world to remove it, and it can actually attack and block a lot better than this kind of creature typically can. So, I'm going to give this like a 2.9 or something. They're definitely limited playable. Essence Channeler here. This is one of my favorite cards in the set. 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/1 Bat Cleric. It is the Ajani's Pridemate ripoff in the set, but maybe slightly better than always. Definitely a million times strictly better than Ajani's Pridemate, I think. But it does have 1 toughness. Johnny's Pridemate starts with 2 toughness, if I'm not mistaken, so it's not strictly better. You can't really use that phrase. Don't catch me slipping here, but still, you know what this card is by now. I think a lot of people have talked about it in the few days that it's been sort of available on the internet. I will have to give, what would I give Voice of the Blessed? 7.2, pretty specific Magic card that goes in one deck that's trying to do one thing. So it's not like a 9 or anything. It's not an 8, but I will give it like a 7.2. I think in the deck that it wants to go in, it just replaces, the card that was going to kill the deck as soon as it left. You know what I mean? So all I'm saying is the quickest way to get over an old man is to get under a new man. You know what I mean? So let's... Essence Channeler is a pretty good Magic card, 7.2. Feather of Flight over here is the 2 mana flash aura that when it enters you draw a card, creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. So this is a good Magic card. 2 mana is a kind of, don't be mistaken that it's kind of a lot, but this actually isn't terrible for like the various aura decks and like even the Prowess decks in Standard, the Slickshot decks, the Valiant decks, the Mice deck that are trying to take advantage of the Valiant ability, and just anything that's looking to play auras in Standard probably might want to play this card. It's actually pretty sick. Just replacing itself when it ETBs at Flash is okay. So, and, for what it's worth, this is mostly a draft action, but even in Standard, you can catch some people slipping, dude. Like, they come in with flying, and you're like, oh, this 5/5 has flying now. It just ruined someone's day. So, I don't know. I don't hate this at all. I'm going to give it a 6.21. Let's do that. Slightly more than it probably deserves. Ours are bad, but I like that one. Flowerfoot Swordmaster up next. This is the 1 mana 1/2 mouse soldier with Offspring. It also has Valiant. It's the guy that has Offspring and Valiant. Whenever it becomes the target of whenever it valiants, mice you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. This card is actually kind of sick in Mice, I think. if you're playing enough like instants and sorceries and stuff that target it, I think it's actually pretty cool, especially considering it doesn't like only trigger once per turn, so you can really get up to some nanigans with the card. So I think it's a cool mouse 1-drop that might actually see play if Mice is a deck, but there are a surprising amount of like really playable Mice 1-drops. There really are, but at this point I'm pretty sure you don't go above 2 on the curve in your mouse deck. So like maybe you play 12 to 16 1-drops and this guy's actually one of them. I'm going to give him a 5.6. I really am. I think this is like a subtly really decent 1-drop that can get up to some business. Harvest Rite Host up next. This is the 3 mana guy. He's a 3/3. And whenever it or another rabbit you control enters, a creature gets +1/+0 till end of turn, but you draw a card if this is the second time. If this is the second time the ability is resolved. This has the potential to be pretty sweet, you know? Just 3 mana card draw in white. That's, again, the going rate nowadays for an ability like this. But it's not quite a welcoming vampire. You have to work way harder for that. And, like, there's a lot of turns where I have a welcoming vampire out, and I'm like, please just draw a creature. Please just draw a creature. And you do. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you do. Imagine having to somehow draw 2 creatures to draw the card. You know, you're sunk in that situation. So just much, much worse in top deck wars, you know. Probably not standard playable, but maybe a pretty important link in the chain for limited decks. So I'm going to give this like a 4. I think that's pretty decent. Hop to it is up next. A deceptively good card too. This is 3 mana for 3/1/1 white rabbits. It's actually pretty good. I think in standard you could do much, much better for 3 mana, obviously. 3 mana in white especially. That has some really good 3-drops. But, you know, if your deck is specifically trying to make tokens for whatever reason, you know, you might have Convoke guys in your deck, right? Like Night Errant of Eos and stuff like that. And like maybe this is okay with an Imidane's Recruiter. That said, I don't think this makes the cut in the Boros deck, so it's kind of cooked as far as actually seeing play in standard. You know, you got Gleeful Demolition, which cost 1/3 what this cost to do literally the same thing. You know, you have to come down on an artifact, who cares? So I'm not sure the card is that good, but 3 mana for 3 tokens does let a lot of decks do cool things, especially decks that specifically want tokens, and obviously it looks like there might be a bunch of those coming up here soon. So I like this. I like that the art is kind of like an 80s freeze frame. You can't tell. Look at that. Look at that freeze frame. The movie's about to end. Credits are about to roll. Freeze frame. We did it, boys. Anyway, that is not a bad card. So I'm actually going to give it a 5.4. Yes, 5.43. 5.434. All right. We'll move on to Jackdaw Savior. This is the 3 mana 3/1 flyer that whenever it or another guy with flying dies, you return a creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. So like a scrap trawler for flying creatures kind of is what basically exactly what it is, rather than artifact creatures or just artifacts. This is okay, right? There's probably setups with this, but I'm not sure that like the setups are good enough for standard. I think they might be good enough for commander though. Maybe, you know. Like there's flying decks in Commander. There's flying decks in Standard too. But we are in a Sunfall Standard. But for what it's worth, there's far less things that exile now. I think we'll get to some stuff that does, like in this set, and I think it's going to be played. But like in this color, we'll get to it. But in any case, I think this is one of those cards that has like a middling chance of seeing play, mostly as part of like an annoying mid-range engine, not necessarily a combo engine, but again, like annoying mid-range engine. So if you got enough stuff that has ETB triggers with flying and, you know, maybe you could cook something, but ultimately I'm not like super impressed. So I'm going to give the card a 5.9. No, I'm not. I'm going to give the card a 6.4, a Nintendo 6.4. We'll do that. Life Creed Duo up next. This is the 2 mana 1/2 like Impassioned Orator, right? It's a flying guy, and whenever a dude enters under your control, you gain a life. This is a solid Magic card. Every time you see this, you just kind of have to give it like a 5.8. You just kind of do. So 5.8. It's gonna really enable a lot, by the way, in this set. Mabel's Metal up next. This is the 2 mana combat trick. At instant speed, a creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn, and then another guy gets +1/+1 if you'd like. Pretty good, actually, for a combat trick. I think this might blow a lot more people out than it is expected to once the limited environment rolls around. But even an amazing combat trick isn't that amazing of a Magic card, so I'm just going to give this like a 3.98, you know, like verging on 4 or something like that. But we'll move on to Mouse Trapper. This is the 3 mana 3/2 tapper in the set. This time it has Flash, but to tap guys down, you have to Valiant. That's the catch, okay? This is not great. I don't love 3 mana 3/2s. I'll probably say it a million times, but maybe this is the only time I'll feel the need to say it. Don't love 3 mana 3/2s, especially in limited. Flash is okay on a 3 mana 3/2, so I'll give it that much. Altogether, though, like a 3.21. Nettle Guard is up next. This is the guy. This is a guy. He's a 2 mana 3/1 that you can pay 1 and sack him to destroy an artifact or enchantment. But also when he Valiants, he gets +0/+2 till end of turn. Neat dude, and like has a chance at seeing super outside standard play. We have a card that's rotating right now from New Capenna, I think it was, that does basically this, but has flash. So it is many, many times better than this card. And that card didn't see a whole lot of play, but occasionally you catch it in the arena. So this is somewhat, it's like that card, but again, I think it's worse. But I still say when you see creatures like this, you know, just bodies that can blow up artifacts and enchantments, it's just a good Magic card all around, period. So I'm going to give it like a 5.6, right? Parting Gust is up next. This is the gift a tapped fish and exile a non-token creature. Now, if you didn't promise the gift, you return the creature to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter beginning of the next end step. So you can not gift the fish and target your own guys to blink them. Or you can take out the, you know, biggest problem on the other side of the table and exile it forever. I think this card sees play and is perhaps the best removal spell in the set. I think this might be when a smoke settles and the dust clears. I think this is probably the one that ends up seeing the most play out of all of these new removal spell pieces. So I think that I'm going to give this like a solid 8. I think this is extremely playable. Yeah, you're giving them a fish, you know, if you use it as removal, but like, so I got rid of your Sheoldred or your Aclazotz, and it can never like reanimate itself or whatever. So I think that just the fact that it exiles is going to be like, you know, worthy of playing the card in standard. So we'll move on though and again, gets better in Commander. Pileated Provisioner is kind of a bad Magic card. It's 5-mana 3/4 flyer. When it enters, you put a +1/+1 guy or counter on a guy without flying. Not great. So we'll just give it like a 1.9 because it flies. Rabbit Response is up next. This is the 4-mana +2/+1 in white of the set. It's okay. What do you give these? You'll play them sometimes in aggro, right? It's instant speed too, so you can just blow your opponent out sometimes after blocks. I don't know, like a 2.5. It's playable. Repel Calamity up next. This is another decent removal spell. The 2-mana instant that destroys a creature with power or toughness 4 or greater. Probably will be carried in a ton of sideboards. So I will give this a 7.1. Sure. Good Magic, very good Magic card. Salvation Swan, the Reclamation Sage of the set. Is that right? No, Reclamation Sage is the 3-mana 2/1 that destroys an artifact or enchantment. The Restoration Angel of the set. Thank you, brain. Jeez. This card is very good. If you've never played against Resto Angel, it's not quite that card, but it's still enough that card, and potentially more than that card, that it's so annoying. So, you know, I'm more scared of playing against this than I am with this. And when you're scared of playing against a card, you know it's pretty good. So I'm going to give this like 7.8, right? Like that sounds like really, really high, but this will probably do things, especially if there's a decent like mid-range deck in standard that can find a home for it, and I think there will be. Then yes, this card looks like it has a future ahead of it. Trust me, Restoration Angel is a really, really good Magic card, and this is going to be that effectively, like a lot of the time. Seasoned Worn Guard up next. This is the 1-mana rabbit that can swing for 3 on turn 2 if you control a token. So this is good because it's very easy to control a token on turn 2, but outside of that, it's not like super great, right? I feel like if it gets in 2 to 3 uncontested attacks, or like it dies on the 3rd attack and trades with something, then like it probably more than did its job. You're very proud of it, right? So as far as 1-drops go, I think a potential 3/2, you know, that you play on turn 1 is pretty bonkers, you know, like when you put it in context of MTG history. You just don't usually see stuff like this, and it's so easy to enable with cards that are already seeing a lot of play in standard. So, you know, I can't give like an aggro 1-drop that doesn't do much more than be an aggro 1-drop, and it's just like a 1/2 for 1 if you can't enable it, right? Like on the floor of the card, it's really, really bad. So I can't give it like too high of a score, but I am going to give it like a 6.3, you know? It's okay. It will see play some of the time, especially if rabbits are anything. This will see play. Season of the Burrow is the white season. This is choose 5 paws worth of mode. You know how it works. For 1 paw, you get a 1/1 white rabbit. For 2 paws, you can exile a non-land permanent and have its controller draw a card. And for 3 paws, you can return a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your yard to the battlefield. Put an indestructible counter on it. That's pretty good. There are lots of ways to use this and get really, really good value off of it, I think. So this is probably one of the better seasons because most of the seasons don't look that impressive. I'm going to weirdly give this card like a 6.9 because it does look pretty nice, but outside of just memes, like I think this card deserves that score. I think it might like be subtly really, really good or never see play. But this massive spread of options on it that, exile non-land permanents, you get to do that twice if you want to. Reset the board and get a, rabbit token or something. It seems okay. And obviously, get 2 rabbits, return a thing from your graveyard to the battlefield, indestructible counter. Like that's decent too. 5 rabbits might be okay depending on what you've cooked. So I don't know, dude. Again, I think that almost no matter how you're using these modes, it's a good Magic card. So 6.9. I'm sticking to it. Sarah Redeemer. How bad is Sarah Redeemer? This is a reprint. It's not in the main set though, so I shouldn't even have to review it. But I am going to give Sarah Redeemer like a 4.2. Shrike Force up next. The Flying Double Strike Vigilance 1/3 for 3 mana. I love this card, dude. 5.1. I know it doesn't deserve that, but you get it suited and booted, you know what I mean? Like you can really start doing real damage with this, and so seems like it might be a janky fun thing to do. So like 5.2 in that area. Sonar Strike, the 2 mana insto speed, 4 damage to a creature that's doing damn near anything, and you gain 3 if you control a bat, which is very easy to do. It's Sanguine Evangelist, Deep Cavern Bat, and Bat's in this set for that matter. So I actually really like this. I think it's almost sleeper potential, but not quite. But it's getting there. I don't think that most people are really prepared for how good this card might be. So I'm going to give this a 6.1 and kind of leave it at that. I think it's a decent removal spell. Star Charter up next. This is the 4 mana 3/1 flyer. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card power 3 or less from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest in the bottom in a random order. This is power 3 or less, so it can find copies of itself and just about everything else that's relevant in your deck if it's your 4-drop. But I think that even if you're in bats specifically, you could probably do better than this as a 4-drop. But I don't know. I don't hate it in like Clerics and Commander even. So it's not a terrible card. I'm going to give it a 4.8. Starfall Infliction, the white sweeper of the set. This one is actually pretty decent. If you promise the gift of a card, you can take a creature that got killed by the spell and put it right back onto the battlefield, which means that you get to repeat enter the battlefield triggers on it, which is really, really juicy, dude. So I like this as a sweeper. I think there's insane ways to like repeat it over and over by just, targeting a creature with it that, brings like an instant or sorcery back from your graveyard to your hand. There's a bunch of those, right? So you can just get into loops with this by doing that. And that's a fun way to play the card for you, not for anybody else at the table. So I don't know. What do you give the 5 mana white sweeper of the set at baseline? Like a 5.5. So with this kind of good gravy on it that actually can, set a mid-range deck up. Mid-range decks, like Esper taught us this. Mid-range decks want to play sweepers. Esper played Sunfall this last season. And they would love to have put, Urtai or Sheldred or Rafine back on the table after a Sunfall. And this would have allowed their mid-range deck to do that. And that's actually a pretty good incentive to not play Sunfall. It's, an ability like that. So I think this does have a chance. I'm going to give this a 6.7, mostly because of that extra couple of tenths of a point as commander play. Thistledown Players is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/3 mouse bard. When it attacks, untap a thing, including itself. It's got vigilance. It's not that great. It's just not that great. 2.4. 2.2, actually. Valley Quest Caller. This is the thing that is an Anthem effect for like 4 different creature types in white and stuff, But also, whenever one of those creature types enters, you scry 1. And it's on a 2 mana 2/3. That ain't bad right there. So overall, this is one of those narrow cards that, if you're playing these guys, if you're playing all these creature types, it's, an 8.5, you know what I mean? But actually trying to judge this in a vacuum is a little bit more difficult. But there's a lot of cards like this in the set, right? So we got to learn how to do it right now. So I'm going to give this like a 6.5 because it's still a 2 mana 2/3 at the end of the day. And it does so much for these decks. And there's tons of rabbits and bats specifically, but, also birds, mice, whatever, your Boros mice. This is an amazing card that you can make this an Anthem effect for, is the end of that sentence. Weird parenthetical splice there. I apologize. But yeah, still, good Magic card. Warren Elder is 2 mana for a 2/2. You can pump mana into it. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Yawn, but you need mana sinks in limited, so 2.4. Warren War Leader is the Leonin War Leader of the set. It's this guy. 4 mana 4/4. He's got Offspring. When you attack, you can either make a 1/1 rabbit, or all your attackers get +1/+1 till end of turn. So noteworthy, he can have a lot of effect on the table the turn he comes in. I do like that. I like this guy a good bit. I think in rabbits, if you're going to play 4-drops, this is your 4-drop. I don't think there's really any other good choices. So, but again, that's if you're going to play 4-drops. But the kind of Anthem effect this guy provides might be really good, especially combined with other Anthem effects. Valley Quest Crawler on 2, Warren War Leader on 4, and you just kind of go to town. So I do like the dude. I think he might have a place in Standard, but I'm not going to give him more than like a 6. Good solid 6. He's probably a little better than that, but especially considering the modality. 6.3, sure. Waxwayne Witness up here. This is the bad Ajani's Pridemate with flying. That could get out of hand, in limited, but it's still probably not that great. So I'm just going to give this a 4.2. How about that? That's too high, but still. Whiskervale Forerunner, the last white card. This is the wordiest card in the entire set. Let's try it out. Let's speedrun this one particular card, see what we can do. 4 mana for a 3/4 mouse bar with Valiant. Whenever it Valiants, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them. You may put it onto the battlefield if it's your turn. If you don't put it on the battlefield, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, geez, Louise, macaroni and cheese. That's how you read a Magic card and not understand a word of it. Yeah, digging 5 for each Valiant and being able to throw something onto the table if it's your turn is pretty sexy, especially considering you can do this like during your combat step, and if the thing that you put onto the table has a cool ETB trigger, then maybe that affects your combat step. There's cool things you can do with it, but I'm still not like super convinced that anyone wants this. I'm really not sure, man. Like, again, commandery looking card. So I'm going to give it a 5.1 because that's called the benefit of the doubt. Okay, we have reached blue, everybody. How we doing, everybody? All right. Oh, my goodness. Whew. Have to take a couple of sips. You heard me going blah, blah, slurping, and I apologize for that. If I remember to, I'll take it out of the YouTube video. So sorry for suffering through that, Twitch chat. I'll take another sip here, and we'll be ready to do blue cards. All right, Azure Beastbinder is up next. This is one that has caused a little bit of controversy in terms of how good people think it is, but I've swayed. Pendulum. I'm a grandfather clock on this one. I keep going back and forth, man. This is 2 mana for a 1/3 rat rogue with vigilance. It cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or greater. And whenever it attacks, up to 1 target artifact, creature, or planeswalker an opponent controls loses all abilities until your next turn. If it's a creature, it also has base power and toughness 2/2 until your next turn. One thing I want to really quickly say is that I've seen a lot of people be like, you can hit Sheoldred with it. And like, you can hit Sheoldred with it, but that just turns off them gaining life from drawing cards. The way the card lines up, you will still be losing life for drawing cards. At least during your draw step, right? So do keep that in mind. But I do think this is a neat little, like, tricky, like, lockdown guy that if your opponent isn't playing creatures, it still has stuff it can do. I like that it hits a spread of different permanent types, right? And if you can increase its power in any way, and there's a lot of ways to do so, then suddenly it becomes like a real threat against your opponent that they just cannot block profitably. And, it's harder for them to have a 1/1 every turn than it sounds. It has vigilance too. So again, especially if you can increase its PT, it can be an annoyance when it attacks and an annoyance when it blocks. The thing that it makes a 2/2 can't block it, but it also can't attack into it profitably, which I think is really neat. And obviously blanking abilities is great. It's just really, really good. So I do think that's a long list of things that are good about the card for me to think the card is bad. Right? But that said, yeah, somebody in chat, Edion, you're absolutely right. It's all about finding a home. And I'm not sure the card has a real home, but there might just be like a blue mid-range deck that, maybe not, you don't have your Deep Cavern Bat on turn 2. You don't have your Subterranean Schooner on 2. What other 2-drop creatures do you want in that deck? There are definitely some. So I'm not saying Beastbinder is the only one, but Beastbinder is an interesting option, but it might be ultimately one of those cards that's too tricky for its own good, Or it may be one of those cards that's so tricky that it's incredible. So it's kind of hard to judge a card like this. But at the end of the day, I still feel like, congratulations, you got in for 1 damage a turn is mostly the problem, but I don't know. Blanking a creature, being a sort of form of removal on a body, that can mess with the board state. It's all pretty interesting, but is interesting good? That's the eternal struggle, right? But again, I think that there are mid-range decks that could definitely take advantage of this. I definitely do. Oh, Fairy Mastermind. That's a good 2-drop you'd play over this, right? There's one. Duelist of the Mind, perhaps. All depends on what you're doing. There's good black 2-drops too. So, yeah, it's not a given that you slam this, but it's not bad. So, as you can tell, I'm stalling on scoring it, and I can't be doing that. It's the first blue card, and we've been on it for like 2 minutes. So, let's just give it a 6 and leave it at that. It could be a 9, right? But I don't think so. Bellowing Cry are up next. This is a lot more simple. Just 2 mana for a 2/1. When it enters, draw a card, discard a card. Pretty cool. You're going to need this kind of value in Limited for the Frogs deck because you're bouncing dudes back and forth to your hand. You need a cheap card with an ETB trigger. This guy's got your back. But even in Standard, it's an interesting ETB, but not one that really tends to see too much play. So I'm going to give this overall like a 4.9, just barely below average. But it's probably actually slightly above average considering a lot of cards have been like 4s right now. So 5. We'll just give it a 5. 5. Calamitous Tide looks like it should be good, right? 6 mana, return 2 dudes to their owner's hands, draw 2, discard 1. So you're putting them way behind. You're going up, baby. You're feeling good, but it costs you your entire turn late in the game. So maybe cram a copy of this, 1 copy precisely into your sealed deck, but I don't even know if it's that good, to be honest. So I'm going to give this like a 3 because it's a huge effect, but it probably doesn't deserve that. 2.9. Let's put it in 2s. Charmed Sleep is up next. This is Charmed Sleep. It's not even in the main set. Charmed Sleep is up 4. Daring Wave Rider, a sleeper-ish kind of card. This is the 6 mana 4/4 that you can just replay an instant or sorcery mana value 4 or less when it comes into play. But that's pretty good. That seems pretty good, It keeps you from doing all the really busted stuff. It does. But note that it can recast counter spells if you blink it at instant speed. I think that's a fun thing. It can recast removal most of the time if you blink it at instant speed. So the card does have a lot of fun stuff it can do. I'll say that much. And he looks like a fun guy to hang out with too. He is surfing. He's surfing on a clamshell or something, and he's got 2 kites behind him. One of them's a big fish. He definitely looks like a fun guy to have time with. He looks like Alan Jackson in the Chattahoochee music video. That's no one knows what I'm talking about right now. But yeah, this is anyway, this is a good Magic card, I venture to say. 6 mana is probably too much to invest in it to begin with, but all that said, dude, 5.9. 5.9. Chat knows that song. All of chat knows that song. Holy crap. Wow. Good. A lot about living and a little about love. Daring Wave Rider, I gotta say, it's teaching me a lot about living and a little about love because I do love it a little bit. I'll give it a 6, and I'll never ever rescind that score. Dourport Mage is up next. This is the 2 mana 1/3 guy that whenever one of your dudes leaves the battlefield without dying, you draw a card, and you can also save your dudes with it. Return a dude that you control to its owner's hand by paying 2 and tapping. So. Good dude, all things considered, man. Somebody pointed out that Temur Sabertooth or something has this ability too, but overall it's a really unique ability in Magic. And Temur Sabertooth is still played in Commander because it has that ability. It's a really good ability. Repeat enter the battlefield triggers is a really nasty thing to do on a body. Save a creature and draw a card. It's like a counter spell on a body that draws you a card. Is actually busted once it's set up, and it's pretty cheap to set up. So if you got the right stuff in your deck, it's an amazing Magic card. And I do think that at least in Commander, it's got a lot to do, but even in Standard, you could do some setups. There are some setups. There are, everybody. There's setups and push-ups for this card. So I'm going to give it a... God, it is kind of narrow. I'm going to give it a 6.6. I'll do that. Eddie Merc Crab is up next. Eddie Mercury. Everyone in the comment section was like, Eddie Mercury, Eddie Murphy Crab. One of those. It was sitting right there, Dev. It just sounds like a mobster name to me. Eddie Merc. And like, you know, it makes me think of Futurama because I'm going to give you the clamps. But anyway, Anywhere Crab is pretty sweet, actually. It's the 7 mana 5/5 flash crab that costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your yard. It enters tapped if it's not your turn, and when it enters, you tap 2 guys. Maybe I wasn't clear in the preview video, but yeah, you play this on your opponent's turn. It doesn't matter that it enters tapped. You almost always play this on your opponent's turn and tap 2 guys down when they move into combat. And then it kind of has haste. You get to untap and attack with it immediately. I think this card is actually fantastic. I really do, man. I don't know if it's a sleeper or not because enough people in the comments were like, no, that is good. So, what do you give Tolarian Terror with Flash? A pretty good score, right? So, I'm going to give this like a 6.9 and never look back. I am so serious. This card is very good. I'm pretty convinced this card is pretty good, dude. And yeah, Terror is still around. Terror is still around. By the way, Mythic Mike, thanks for your tier 1 sub and for gifting gifting subs to like 1 million people. What is that? 10, 20 people? Jeez Lord. Wow, thank you. Thank you, Mythic Mikey. You're incredible, dude. You're the best person I've ever met. Thank you, seriously. Sincerely. Eluge, the Shoreless Seed is up next. 4 mana, 3 of it's blue. For a star legendary elemental fish, and all those stars are equal to your islands, but when it enters or attacks, you get to put a flood counter on a land. That makes it an island in addition to its other types. The first instant or sorcery spell you cast every single turn costs blue or 1 less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. This is another one a lot of people pointed out in the comments section, something I didn't say in the video, is that it does make things that cost a blue mana free. Good. Free spells are great. Really, really good. And once you do get like a second flood counter on a thing by attacking with this, you can kind of start both rocking and rolling. And also rocking and a reeling, Barbaran, that you can do some real things with this card once you have 2 flood counters. Because, you know, 2 mana, probably got a lot of those cards in your deck. So casting things for free is incredible. Probably makes this all right. But you're very dedicated to islands in that case, you know. Pretty interesting commander to kind of work around with, especially considering there are a couple of other cards in Magic that put flood counters on things. You know, you could do stuff with that maybe. So I think it's kind of neat, but kind of neat doesn't cut it a lot of the time, especially in like 60 card 1v1. So I'm just going to give this like a 5.3 and that's the end of that. Finch Formation is 3 mana for a 2/2 Bird Scout. Offspring 3, it has flying. When it enters, a creature you control gains flying. Strictly Better Windrakes around here get about a 3.4. Gossip's Talent is up next. I'll move it to my melon head so you can see this. This is a 2 mana blue class, and whenever a creature you control enters, surveil 1, pump it up for 2. Whenever you attack, target attacking creature with power 3 or less cannot be blocked this turn. Pump it up for 4 mana. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, exile it. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This looks sleepery to me, to be honest. Honestly, for 2 mana, the rate on whenever a creature you control enters surveil 1 is okay. It's all right. It's like a Season of Growth in green, but actually slightly better than a Season of Growth. Because Season of Growth, if I'm not mistaken, is whenever a creature you control enters, scry 1. This is a little bit better than that. Also fuels a bunch of stuff you might be trying to do too, where like the Scry wouldn't do that. And Season of Growth is an okay Magic card. It's okay, you know, but the fact that this second ability exists, I think actually allows you to pop off a lot more than you might think. You may never actually snap off this level 3 thing. Who cares about that? I think that levels 1 and level 2 are just actually sneakily good. So I'm going to give this a 6.5. And again, never look back. I really think that this could be almost something special while not quite being that special, but a little more special than everyone thinks it is. I totally made my point there, didn't I? Let's move on to Into the Floodmaw, the unsummon effect of the format. Just a blue mana for an instant. Return a creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand, but if you gift a tapped fish, then you instead return a non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So this is really, 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 really good. I want to really stress how incredibly good this Magic card is. Returning a non-land permanent for 1 mana at instant speed is ridiculous tempo. It is ridiculous tempo. And even if you're not like gifting the fish, like 9 times out of 10, you're targeting a creature anyway. So I just want you to know that, you know, incredible unsummon, but with the best unsummon upside you've ever seen, you know, like that's Yes, I know that gifting a fish, like giving them a body for taking something away, and it's like it's just a bounce, so they get to replay it, and like they go way up ahead on you in terms of board presence. It makes the card look kind of bad in terms of theory, but the tempo decks that want this card can play the hell out of this card, dude. So, you know, all their creatures fly anyway. They don't care if you get a 1/1 guy that can chump block. No, it can't. All my guys fly or are unblockable or whatever. So I think that the right decks will play this to massive effect. And even if you're, you know, honestly, even if you're just playing it like an unsummon, that's really good. Fading Hope is really good. It's so good. So, like, people don't understand how good Unsummon is in the right spot. It can ruin an entire game for somebody. So, I think this is just wonderful. I love my Unsummon variants, and I am biased towards them. So, even though it's not a removal spell per se, I'm still going to give this a solid 6.3. It's good. This is a good card. Yeah, Fading Hope rotates. Fading Hope rotates, so we did need this. Kidnap is up next. This is the 4 mana like control magic of the set. You can gift a card if you want to. If you don't gift the card, you put 3 stun counters on the guy you're stealing. So it's bad. I think the control magics are typically kind of bad nowadays. One of them hasn't seen play in a good long time. But I do have a soft spot for these. I think they're my favorite form of removal all in all. Except for Eaten by Piranhas and Witness Protection. I really like, you know, the 1 and 2 mana. You know, so those are really good. But I think those take priority over cards like this, and even those don't see much play in Standard. So all in all, I really can't give this more than like a 4.6, and that hurts me. That hurts me so bad because I love Control Magic. I want to give it a 6 every time I see it, but it's just not there. Waka's up next. Kitsa, Otter Ball Elite. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 Otter Wizard with Vigilance and Prowess. You can tap it to draw a card and discard a card, or you can pay 2 mana, tap it, and copy an instant or sorcery you control, and choose new targets for the thing. But you can only do this if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. So, wow, this is a good Magic card, man. This is a pretty decent Magic card. I don't know that it 100% makes the cut in the deck it wants to go in, though. That's the problem I have with it. Is in like blue-red Slickshot. Does it see play? Doesn't fly. Doesn't have any actual evasion of any kind. You know, that's kind of an issue. But it does have some sort of late-game reach where you copy the Lightning Strike. And just copying a spell will help, you know, certain creatures trigger certain things. So, I don't know. Do note, though, that if you copy an instant or sorcery, you're not casting it. So, I don't think that triggers prowess, you know. I think it has to specifically read whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. And I'm not sure that too many abilities actually read that in Standard right now. So, kind of a very technical strike against the card, right? But still, copying a burn spell or a card draw spell is a pretty sweet extra alternate mode on what is maybe the best Merfolk looter of all time, next to perhaps Rona in Dominaria United. So, but that's a pretty good territory to be in, right? So, hey, loots is good, you know, if you're in Slickshot and you are digging for like the Monstrous Rage or just anything that triggers prowess during combat or whatever it is. This is a way to sort of threaten that. So that's pretty good. You know, if you draw dead, you draw land for the turn on turn 6, then this will help you a lot. So looting is good. But I don't know, man. It's kind of tough to score. So I didn't use it for white. I get 1, you know, ask the audience per color. So I will give chat about 10 to 15 seconds here. Chat, score this card. Kitsa, Otter Ball Elite. What is this card? You tell me, because I'm interested in what you guys think. It's such a tough call. It really, what is really, really good Merfolk looter nowadays? Because I fear that we've reached a sort of nexus point in Magic where this card isn't good, even though it should be really, really good. Cards printed in 2015, all-star for the rest of time, right? All right, what do we got over here? We got a 5. We got an 8, a 7.9, a 5.3, a 7, a 6.5, a 6.9, a 4. Do you see the giant spread of scores on this? Like, what is the average score in chat? The highest score is 8. There's also a 7.9, so it's not like an outlier. And then the lowest score is a 4. 5 is the next lowest score. We got a 6.5 and a 7, a 5.3 again. So like, we got a 7. We got a 7 in chat. What's an example of a 10? That's a really, 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 really good question. That is a phenomenal question. I have no idea what a 10 is. I have no idea what the best Magic card of all time is. That's a video we should do, right? What is the best Magic card of all time? I'm getting a lot of sort of 7s here, and I think that's probably about right. I think 7 is probably about where I want to be. Yes, Soul Ring is a 10. Yeah, Ancestral Recall. Ancestral Recall is a 10. That is exactly right. 100%. Yes, Ancestral Recall. That's probably the best Magic card ever, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. We won't see that. We will not see a 10 in this set. But anyway, that's a lot of time on one card. Night Fisher is up next. The 5-mana 4/5 flyer. And whenever a non-token bird you control enters, you get another... you get a 1/1 blue fish. So I actually think this is pretty neat in limited specifically. And because of that, I'm going to give it a 4.4. I really think this is a pretty good card in limited. Sort of an uncommon bomb. But Lightshell Duo is up next. This is 4 mana for a 3/4 prowess when it enters Surveil 2. It's okay for limited. I'll give it a 2. Long River Lurker up next. 3 mana for a 2/3 frog scout with Ward 1. Other frogs you control also have Ward 1, and when it enters, a creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever that creature deals combat damage this turn, you may exile it. If you do, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. You get to blink your stuff if it goes through. And, you know, it makes your stuff easy to get through at least one turn. So... pretty cool card, not standard playable, sadly, but, you know, it walks the line sort of in the frog theme deck. So it's neat. I like the look of, you know, the guy too. He kind of looks like Glenn from Chrono Trigger. So I'm on the search for like which frog in this set looks the most like it could be Glenn. And this guy's like an 8 in that department. But when it comes to everything else, Glenn would do. I feel like Glenn would do this too. Like we're X striking, you know, like you're unblockable this turn, and I'm going to protect you. This is a very Glenn ability. But anyway, I got to get off this. This is like a 4.9. Yeah, this is just below average. Long River's Pull, the counter spell of the set. If you gift a card, it's just counter spell. If you don't gift a card, it's Essence Scatter. I love this card. I'm going to give it a 7.1. I really am. Mind Spiral's up next. 5 mana to draw 3 cards at sorcery speed. If you promise them a tapped fish, then you put a stun counter on a guy they control. This is not good, but still, maybe you'll play it in like limited controller and sealed control. Sealed control. Certainly. I'm going to give this like a 4. Sure. Mind Spring is not in the main set, but I would give it a 4. Mind Whisker is up next. 3 mana for a 3/2. It's a rat wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1. It's a threshold. As long as 7 or more cards are in your yard, creatures your opponents control get -1/-0. A couple of neat abilities on this 4.71. Mockingbird up next. This is the 1/1 flyer that you can have enter as a copy of any creature on the whole table that is the same mana value as what you spent on Mockingbird. And it's X and a blue. This is, in my opinion, one of the best cards in the set. I don't know. It's still so hard to tell if this really sees a whole lot of standard play. But I think there's a massive chance that it does. Even if it doesn't, it might literally be one of the best clones of all time for Commander. I do not think people are paying enough attention to this. I've said this before, but just in case this is your first time seeing this, you know, this isn't mana value equal to X. It's not. It doesn't copy a creature mana value equal to X. It's mana value equal to the mana you spent to cast Mockingbird. So it's always, you know, pay whatever the creature's casting cost is to copy it. And I think that is really good. And you can copy 1 and 2 drops for 1 and 2 mana. And there are so many ways that that's broken, dude. But even in standard. So I'm going to give Mockingbird an 8, and I will never back down. Mockingbird gets an 8. 100%. Yeah, there's people in chat like 8.5, you know, hard 10 on Mockingbird. Like, there are people in chat who are like all about Mockingbird, and I don't blame them. 8 was conservative in my mind, but there's people in chat who, you know, yeah, their creature too. Any creature on the whole table. This card is nuts. This card is banana bread. Really, really good card. I'm so serious. Unassumingly one of the best cards in the set. Night Whirl Hermit. This is 3 mana for a 1 for vigilance. A 1 for vigilance, get it? And if you have threshold, it gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. A lot of can't be blocked stuff in blue in the lower rarities, and I do kind of like that, especially with some cards that look kind of bad otherwise, but if you put them on the unblockable guys, they're okay, you know? But this guy is just like a limited special. I'm going to give him a 2.6. And we can next 60. I think it's the first time we've done that. Oh no. Do it. Okay, it is doing it. Good. Load the page. You're cutting into my speedrun time. Scryfall, thank you. Otterball Antics up next. This is the 2-mana sorcery where you get a 1/1 with prowess, and if you cast it anywhere other than your hand, you get a +1/+1 counter on the guy. It says flashback 3 in a blue. So make it 1/1 the first time, 2/2 the second time, and trigger prowess on all your guys every time. I actually kind of really like spells that create bodies, because you need them in prowess decks, don't you? You need spells in prowess decks. You need bodies in prowess decks. This fulfills both of those ends, and I tend to really like stuff like this. Overrated, which I'll do right now, 5.2. Pearl of Wisdom is up next. This is the thing that draws you, it's a divination. 3 mana for 2 cards at sorcery speed, but it only costs 2 if you control an otter, which shouldn't be too hard, especially considering certain cards that we'll see very soon. In this set review. I actually kind of like this given the context of the set, but what do you give strictly Better Divination? Like, Divination is an okay card anyway. It's seen play. Wouldn't see play now, but it has in the past. So I'm just going to give this like a 5.4. I think it's a little better than it might look. I think some people see cards like this and they're like, oh yeah, otters, stupid stuff. Who cares? But this is actually okay. Plume-Creed Escort is up next. 2 mana for a 2/1 flash flyer. And when it enters, a creature you control gains hexproof till end of turn. Card's busted. Card's really good. I really think this card is unbelievably good. It's a better version of the 0/3 flash blue creature from March of the Machine. Yeah. It is kind of like that. A little bit. This is just counter a removal spell on a body that flies. I think that's really I'm running out of words. Phenomenal, fantastic, just stupendous. This is a really good Magic card, dude. It isn't like Spell Queller or anything. It's not Urtai. Like, it's not just a body that counters a spell, but if you're playing the right kind of deck, it is kind of effectively that. So if you're trying to push damage in your tempo deck, this is a really good card. I'm going to give it a 7.1. I love this card. Portent of Calamity. Scrumtrolescent. What.life. Good call. Portent of Calamity is sleepery a little bit. This is X and a blue for a sorcery. Reveal the top X of your library. For each card type, exile a card of that type from among them. Put the rest into your yard. You can cast a spell from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. If you exiled 4 or more cards this way, put the rest of the cards into your hand, the ones that you exile. So basically you have to have a delirium's worth of card types that you rip off the top of your library with this to be able to cast a free card. That should actually be pretty easy, I think. Somebody in my comments section pointed out something that I was kind of hinting at, but didn't go all the way on because I didn't want to get like too in depth on any one card. But they kind of picked up what I was putting down, and they extended my thought process, and they were 100% right. The conditions for getting this to pop off are very near the same as Atraxa, right? Because if you play Atraxa, you want to have a bunch of different card types in your deck so that you draw as many cards as possible once Atraxa does enter the battlefield, right? You're also trying to make 7 mana so that you can get to Atraxa. So if you're in a ramp deck that's making 7 mana to get Atraxa anyway, but also plays a large spread of card types, doesn't it just make sense to play Portent of Calamity? Because if you Portent of Calamity for X equals 5 or 6, you'll either get a free spell off of it, or you'll put like 3 cards into your hand, and that's not terrible. But you really don't want to whiff on this. So you almost always want like X to be 7 or 8 or something like that. That said, this can also just be, 3 mana draw 2. Again, it can just be divination. This can be 3 mana draw 2, and that's an okay use for it in ramp as well. So I actually think this is like really modal in some ways. If you are in a ramp deck that's already, building to these conditions, then the card is somewhat playable. So I don't hate this like at all, dude. I'm going to give this, and it also fuels graveyard strategies too. Puts cards into your hand if it doesn't free cast, and there's just a lot of good things, dude. There are good things about this card. So I'm going to give this a 6.38, we'll say. Runaway Together is a reprint. It's 2 mana for an instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different people. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. Neat card that can sometimes mess with stuff, but I'm still just going to give it like a 4. Season of Weaving up next. The blue season, 6 mana for a Sork. You get 5 paws. For 1 paw, you can draw a card. For 2 paws, you can choose an artifact or creature you control and create a token that's a copy of it. And for 3 paws, you can return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. Woo! That's a great last mode, but is it worth 6 mana? I'm not sure, but almost Cyclonic Rift and draw 2 cards in Standard might be playable, like create a token copy of the best thing I have and it stays on the table. That's also kind of okay. So I don't know. I want to give this card a 6, but it's really hard to do that. 5.7, but even that is higher than I want to give it. It's just, if you can get to the card, it will have a tremendous effect on the game. It will, but I worry that half the time you're just casting Calamitous Tide. Remember, we just read Calamitous Tide? Return 2 dudes to their hand and draw 2 cards, discard a card. I feel like sometimes this card's just going to be that card, and that card's bad. So, 5.5. Let's just keep ducking it points. Shoreline Looter is 2 mana for a 1/1 rat rogue that cannot be blocked, and once you have Threshold, when it does combat damage to a player, you draw a card, and then discard a card unless you have Threshold. So you'll always draw a card, and if you don't have Threshold, you discard. So it's like a suspicious stowaway or something that naturally becomes Seafaring Werewolf rather than having to do some dumb day-night stuff. I kind of like that. It's a card I hold close to my heart. It does have 2 important creature types, too, in the upcoming format, which Sus Stowaway didn't necessarily have. Like Human and Werewolf are kind of okay. But Rogue especially, that's a good creature type. Altogether, I really like this little guy, and I'm going to give him a 5.3 because, I want to score him higher than that, but overall, he's probably not high enough impact, But I do like the guy. I do. And he does facilitate a lot more than it looks like he facilitates. But Spellgyre up next is a good magic card. I'll stake my claim. This is 4 mana for an instant. Choose 1, counter a spell, or surveil 2, draw 2. Those are good modes to have on the same card. They really, really are, dude. I will have to go ahead and give this a 6.7. And I know that sounds nuts, but I think this card almost certainly sees Standard play. We've been jaw-jacking for months about what replaces Memory Deluge. I honestly think this is a hard shot. A super hard shot at doing it. Splash Lasher is up next. 4 mana for a 3/3 offspring for 2 mana. When it enters, tap up to 1 target creature, put a stun counter on it. A beast in limited. I actually think this is really, really good in limited, but aside from that, not great. 1.9, 2.2, 2.2. Splash Portal is the sorcery speed 1 mana blink a guy. Also, if it's the right creature type, you get to draw a card. So, pretty cool. It's okay. I don't love that it's sorcery speed. I wish I could save a guy. But really, you're just using this to repeat ETB triggers, and that's pretty cool. So, I'll just give this a 5.3. It's a good magic card, but sorcery speed does really kill it. Even more than sorcery speed tends to. Storm Chaser's Talon is a single blue mana. It's a class, and you get a 1/1 otter when it ETBs. That's the best thing about the card, and that's pretty good. It really is. But for 4 mana, you can beef it up. And when it becomes level 2, you get to return an instant or sorcery from your yard to your hand. On level 3, that's going to cost you 6 mana, kid. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess, a worse Monastery Mentor, because Monastery Mentor triggers on non-creatures. This is specifically instant or sorcery. But if you've got the mana laying around, I guess you do it. But the first couple of modes on this are really where the meat is, 4 mana is a lot for level 2, but if it's an important instant or sorcery, you bet your butter buns you'll do it. You'll bring back the removal or the counter spell or the 7 mana spell to recast that next turn or whatever it is. This isn't a bad mode, level 2, but honestly, I just like 1 mana for a 1/1 prowess, and it's a token, and you get an enchantment attached to it, 2 permanents at the same time. It's pretty good. That's pretty good just in terms of the ways you can leverage that synergy, So I'm going to give this a 6.5, and I'm serious. I am so serial. Sugarcoat is up next. 3 mana for an aura with flash. You can enchant a creature or a food. And the permanent's a colorless food artifact with all the things you can do with the food. It loses all other card types and abilities it had. A lot of people point out that the reason it enchants a food is so it doesn't fall off as soon as the guy becomes a food. Of course. Cute little card here. It really is. But this kind of removal only gets a 4.2 when I see it. Even stuff like Imprisoned in the Moon, I'm just not a huge fan. Thieving Otter up next, though. This is also a reprint. 3 mana, 2/2, and when it deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. It's fine. 3.9. Thought Shucker is up next. It's not... That word is Shucker, okay? This is 2 mana for a 1/3 Rad Rogue. It has Threshold. 2 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on Shucker and draw a card. Activate only if 7 or more cards in your yard only once. Pretty bad, right? 1.1. It's better than a 1.1. It's like a 1.5 6. Thunder Trap Trainer up next. This guy I like. 2 mana for a 1/2 Otter Wizard with Offspring 4. When it enters, look at the top 4 of your library, reveal a non-creature, non-land from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this is a good effect. On a body, I get to, for 2 mana, I get to do this. So Wandering Mind, but like a little bit better considering its mana cost, I think. And it's a modality. When you do have 6 mana, getting 2 cards on 2 bodies is pretty good. So I like this a good bit. I think there might be room for it in the occasional like bluish mid-range deck. So I'm going to give this like 6.9, and I'm serious. I'm going to give this a 7.2, and I'm serious. I'm serious. You have to be, you have to have the courage of your convictions. I think that a near Impulse on a body for the same price as Impulse is pretty good, dude. Even without the Offspring. But Valley Floodcaller's up next. This is the 3 mana 2/2 flash. You can cast non-creature spells at instant speed. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this spread of creature types gets +1/+1 till end of turn. And you get to untap them. Untap them is interesting for like commander combos and stuff where you can loop untapping like tap creatures and stuff. So that is something you need to remember, but I love any card with this line of text. You may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. I have love for that exact line of text. Sorceries are now instants. Planeswalkers are now instants. Enchantments are now instants. Just always something that I'm going to welcome. But the card is good outside of that too. And itself, it has flash, which is always extremely important for cards like this too. So I'm going to just go out on a limb here and give this like a 6.4. I actually think that this has like specific tricks to get up to in Commander, but might also be a surprising standard card. Waterspout Warden up next, though. This is 3 mana for a 3/2 Frog Soldier. When it attacks, if another creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, it gets it a flying. Okay, I guess it's okay. 2.1. Wishing Well is up next. This is 4 mana for an artifact. Tap to put a coin counter on it. Do this as a sorcery, by the way. When you do, you may cast target instant or sorcery with mana value equal to the number of coin counters on Well from your yard without paying the mana cost. Obviously, if the spell will be put into your yard, you exile it instead because you can't just cast the same spell over and over. You couldn't anyway, right? Because every time you tap it, you put a coin counter on it, so you can never cast the same spell twice. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think sorcery speed just kills this. I really, really do. I had people fighting me in the comments section of that video, where I first said I don't really love this. Maybe it's commander playable, potentially, but it always gets a coin counter. Once it gets a certain number of coin counters, it ain't casting nothing, Jack. You have to have the right number of things, like a 1-drop in your yard to actually use it when it comes into play, and like that's still not good. So I don't know. I think this card's really situational. And if you do set it up, it's okay, but it's way too slow to actually get casting important stuff. You cannot use it to counter spells because it's only activated sorcery speed. I want to like this card, but I kind of can't. Again, you just got the right commander setup, then maybe, but ultimately, meh, I think. So I'm going to give Wishing Well a 5.1 because I'm a positive Pete. We'll move on to the black cards, and I'm going to take a little sipski if you don't mind, guys. Hold on real quick. Oh, that's so good. Oh, man. Watermelon Kool-Aid. I've never had it before. I bought it at Walmart earlier today because I was looking for some Kool-Aid. I don't know. I just had a hankering. Like, man, I want some Kool-Aid. Usually I drink tea, right? But, yeah. I kind of want some Kool-Aid. I'll get some Tropical Punch Kool-Aid, which I did get, but I didn't even know watermelon Kool-Aid was a thing. It is delicious, but I'm also going to take a sip of coffee. And then we're going to get to it. Agate Blade Assassin is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/3 Lizard Assassin. Whenever it attacks, the defending player loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. Pretty cool card. But that's about where it ends, right? It's all right. I'll give it a 2.2. Bandit's Talent. Y'all, this is 2 mana for a class, and when it enters, each opponent discards 2 unless they discard a non-land card, which is probably what they'll do. For 1 mana, you can level this up. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they're going to lose 2 life. Also, for 4 mana, you can level this up to 3. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. This is an incredible, card for discard, and we got so many good cards for discard. One thing I didn't really point out in the video during preview season about this card is that, okay, that 4th mode is a lot of mana, but too often in discard decks, you enter top deck mode against your opponent. And in that case, it might be worth effectively skipping a turn, right? But maybe you're not. Maybe you're not. Maybe you have 5-6 mana so you can hold up removal or whatever. But you spend your turn on leveling this up, and now you're not at card parity with your opponent anymore, which is it's an enormous thing for a discard deck, right? So I actually think that third mode could be kind of really, really good for, again, breaking that parity once you like tend to enter top deck mode. But this also gives you the engine you need to actually kill your opponent in your discard deck while also being a 2-mana discard card in and of itself. This card is nuts, man. I love this card. One of my favorite cards in the entire set. Black has a lot of bangers this time around. It always does. You know, it's like my favorite color in Magic. But man, Bandit's Talon is a card I'm excited to play, and thank God it's uncommon. So I'm going to give this like a 7.7. I really am. Multiples, it's crazy. You get 2 of these out, and that is a clock. It's a real clock. And man, they juiced it too. Didn't they push this card because like level 2 only cost 1 mana? What were they thinking, you know? Like on turn 3, I don't even have to drop a land. I can just Hopeless Nightmare and level this up or something. Like, okay, seems like it's decent. But Bone Cache Overseer is up next. A single black mana for a 1/1 Squirrel Warlock. You tap and you pay 1 life and you draw a card. Activate only if 3 or more cards left your yard this turn, or if you sacked a food this turn. I had some people pushing back on me in the comments section. I didn't call this card mediocre. I said it was pretty good. But there were people in the comments that said this guy is incredible. And I don't know. I'm kind of coming around on it. I think that it's pretty easy to sack a food even without paying the mana to sack it. You sack it to something else. And this is just an extra card every turn. And that's pretty good. And it's just 1 mana on the ground floor, you know, to get started. You don't have to pay any mana to use its ability. It's just use your life as a resource like a big boy, you know? So I think that this is a pretty good Magic card, all things considered. I'm going to give it a 5.8, which is pretty good. Coiling Rebirth. This is 5 mana for the Reanimator spell of the set. Return a creature card from your yard to the battlefield. If you promise them a card and that creature's not legendary, create a token that's a copy of the creature, except it's a 1/1. My God, this card is busted. The more I think about it, the more I think this is absolutely the best, you know, Reanimator spell in Standard. Cruelty of Gix is really good, and Squirming Emergence is good if you can, you know, enable it and all that. But in terms of just like raw power, doing the thing you want to do, you know what I mean? Like, this is probably it. Rakdos Joins Up can get back legendaries and actually incentivizes getting back legendaries, and Cruelty can get back just anything. And those are good things, but even being restricted from like using legendaries here, there's still a ridiculous amount of amazing options, one of which we will come across pretty soon here in this video, that are just back-breaking when you land them and you resolve this card. So yeah, man. Note too that you can get back legendaries with this. I hate to imply that you can't. You can get back legendaries. If you don't get the card, there's no restriction to what you get back. So even if you do get the card, there's no restriction, but there's just no reason to get the card in that case. But still, I do think this is like potentially playable. More than potentially playable. What do you give a Reanimator spell like this? A 6.8 is what you give it. Consumed by Greed is 3 mana. For an instant, you gift a card, and an opponent sacks a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. If the gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Aside from the white removal spell that exiles a dude for 2 mana or whatever, exiles, I think it's a non-land permanent for 2 mana. It's just scary. This, I think it might be the second best removal spell in the set. And there are some good removals in the set, but this is way up there for me. I think this is, I was going to say subtly really good, but not even subtly. It's just Soul Shatter. We know how good Soul Shatter is, right? And Soul Shatter, that doesn't necessarily create card advantage, but sure, you have a card, I'll get my Sheldred back. That sounds okay. You have a card, I'll get my Preacher of the Schism back. That kind of sounds okay too. So I do really like this, and I'm going to give it a solid like 6.9. I'm serious. Card's really good. Cruel Claw's Heist, though. My goodness. Cruel Claw's Heist. 2 black mana for a sorcery where if you'd like to, you can gift a card. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land from it, exile that card. If the gift was promised, you can cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast it. A lot of people pointed this out too in the comments section because I did, honest to God, miss this. I don't always miss the thing people are pointing out, but in this case I did. If you gift the card to them, you can get that card. You can pull that card with this because they draw the card before you look at their hand and choose. So that's very, very cute. You're actually just increasing the chance that you nab something really good with it. And I like that. But do note that if you don't get the card, this is just 2 mana, choose a card, exile it. That is a busted magic card. It's Thoughtseize, but you exile the card. That's unbelievable. It's really actually hard to believe that exists with upside, for 2 mana. So these discard decks, and I like too, that was stuff like the class that we saw. It's okay to have your opponent exile cards. They don't trigger on your opponent discarding cards. Like most of the discard payoffs in Standard right now don't trigger on your opponent discarding cards or anything like that, other than like Raven Man. They trigger because your opponent has less cards in their hand or no cards in their hand or whatever it is. And so you're incentivized to play cards that exile cards. You're allowed to play cards that exile cards. And Cruel Claw's Heist, dude, this is one of the best cards, not just one of the best black cards in the set, but like one of the best cards in the set. I am pretty convinced. So I'm going to give this. Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready for this score? Are you? I'm going to give this card an 8.6. I'm going to give this card an 8.6. It might end up being one of the highest scores of the night. Too much water? I don't think so. You can draw it late and it doesn't do much of anything, but I don't think it matters. You could say the exact same thing about Thoughtseize. I draw Thoughtseize on turn 9, it doesn't do anything. Like, okay. Darkstar Augur, this is the Bat Bob over here. 3 mana for a 2/3 flyer with Offspring for a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top of your library, put it into your hand, lose life equal to its mana value. That is Bob Text, Dark Confidant text. But it's 3 mana or 4 mana if you'd like to really, really do a lot of damage to yourself. But, if you've got the right curve going in your deck, this isn't going to deal that much damage. And, a lot of the time it's going to put a land in your hand anyway. Some turns it's not going to deal any damage to you because you just put 2 lands in your hand. And there's other cards in Standard that actually want you to lose life on your turn. They turn on when you do that. So, I don't know. This is actually a pretty good looking Magic card. I think that, again, Preacher of the Schism might be a better 3-drop, but there's not a whole lot of 3-drops in Standard that can give you, this kind of card advantage, or 4-drops for that matter. So, one thing I will say is that this kind of gets around Sheldred while still losing you life, but you didn't draw the card. So there's that. I do like it, though. I do think this is a pretty solid Magic card and is at least Commander playable, which I have not said about every single card yet in this set. I'm going to give this a 7.2. I think it's pretty good. I really do. Dire Sight is 3 mana, 2 and a black. Surveil 2, draw 2, you lose 2 life at sorcery speed. This card is just kind of okay. It's Read the Bones. It's just better than Read the Bones. And if a card is better than Read the Bones, it's kind of okay. 5.4? It's a better than average card. Downwind Ambusher is 4 mana. This is a 4/2 Skunk Assassin with Flash, and when it enters, either a thing gets -1/-1 till end of turn, or you destroy a thing that was dealt damage this turn. A fine limited card. I do like that it can pick stuff off regardless of what happened that turn. I think that's a cool mode. So I'd play it in limited. 2.9. Early Winter is 5 mana. For an instant speed, exile a creature or target opponent exiles an enchantment they control. This is too much mana. Even though you get to mess around with enchantments in black, you don't see that every day. It's still too much mana, 2. Feed the Cycle is 2 mana for an instant as an additional cost to cast it. Forage or play black, destroy target creature or planeswalker. So if we were going to do a top 3 removal spells in the set, this would be in that top 3, right? Fell would be in the top 4. I think it's number 4. We'll get to it in a second. Feed the Cycle, though, is just strictly Better Heroes Downfall. And a strictly Better Heroes Downfall gets a 7 from me, baby. That is a good Magic card right there. Fell, on the other hand, is 2 mana, sorcery speed, destroy a creature. The first time destroyed target creature has ever been seen at 2 mana, but they screwed it up by making it a sorcery. Card is kind of bad, actually, but still extremely cubable, extremely commanderable, perhaps, and maybe even in exactly the right circumstance, Standard playable. But I just think you take other options. I'd rather play Go for the Throat. Instant speed is so massive, so I don't know. I'm going to give it a 6.4, something like that. Glide Dive Duo is 5 mana for a 3/3 Bat Lizard with flying. When it enters, each opponent loses 2, you gain 2. Want it to be fun? I like Black Burn. I like bats. Card's not actually very good. 2. Hazel's Nocturne is 4 mana for an instant. Return 2 creatures from your yard to your hand. Each opponent loses 2, you gain 2. Better than it looks, right? You get 4 mana for draw 2 effectively just out of your yard. And you get a little bit of gravy on top. Yeah, usually I feel like this would lose you life, but no, not at all. Again, Black Burn. We all like Black Burn. Oh, Black Betty, Black Burn. So I think I'm actually going to give this a 5.1. I really do. Huskburster Swarm is up next. 8 mana for a 6/6 elemental insect with menace and death touch that costs 1 less to cast for each dude in your yard and each dude in exile that you own. That's pretty cool, actually. That's actually cool. There's tricks where you can exile a bunch of cards from the top of your library with like Demonic Bargain or whatever it is. It's like exile the top 13. And other stuff, you know, just exile like the top half of your library with a couple of different cards that are available to play. And suddenly this always costs 1 mana. Very, very cute. I think that the fact that it's cards you own in exile is actually kind of a big-ish deal and makes it better than it looks by a good bit. So I'm going to actually give this card a 6.1, and you can take that in your pipe and eat it. I'm serious, dude. I think this card has a chance. I really do. Iridescent Vine Lasher. A single black mana for a 1/2 Lizard Assassin with Offspring 2 and landfall when this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So it's impossible for me to be objective when it comes to this card. This is probably my favorite card in the set. I reserve the right to say something else is also my favorite card in the set, but if you just ask me off the top of your head, like, what's your favorite card in Bloomburrow, I would probably come up with this guy. I love this dude. I cannot wait to play with him. We're going to do busted stuff. Standard, Commander, Pioneer. We're going to do busted stuff with this card. Modern. We're going to do busted stuff with this card. I really think that this is destined to see play in a ton of formats. What did we give the discard spell? An 8.7? $9.1. This card is not a 9.1. Are you ready? Are you ready for that? This card dies to cut down. So somebody in the comments or whatever is going to be like, but it dies to cut down. It can't be a 9. Monastery Swiftspear dies to cut down. Deathrite Shaman dies to cut down. So many creatures die to cut down, dude. Like so many. Delver of Secrets dies to cut down. So many of the best creatures of all time die to cut down. I don't think it's a great argument. So I'm seriously going to give this a 9.1. I really, really will. Yeah, it dies to shock. Yeah, somebody got me. It does do that, but I still think that, you know, if they don't have those cards, and even if, here's another thing about these 1-drops, if they have cut down my Iridescent Vine Lasher, do you have it for the Deep Cavern Bat? You're in trouble, right? So even if it does eat a cut down, it served a purpose. And it's good in the late game because you can offspring it later, you know. It works so well with so many combos, dude. But even if you don't combo it, you just get it on turn 1, it's going to bolt the opponent. Like, at least. It's going to bolt the opponent. And I think that's pretty good for a 1-drop. So, I love Vine Lasher. I'm going to give it a 9.1, and I am 100% serious. Maha, It's Feathers Knight. Another one of my favorite cards in the set, though. I really do like this thing. 5 mana for a 6/5, a legendary elemental bird with Flample and Ward, discard a card. Creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. Silly card. Absolutely silly card. Especially in combination with all the things that like give your opponent's creatures -1/-1 as static effects. We have a bunch of those like in Magic history. So this is a really fun commander to brew with, or just a fun commander to put in the 99 or whatever you're doing. It's just a very, very solid black card that has this massive effect on the entire table, right? It's also a really cool cube option. I think this is a really, really neat cube option for like not necessarily underpowered, but simplified cubes. The ward effect, as we know, is a backbreaker. Ward discard a card is very, very good. Is it as good as Aclazot's? So does it earn the Aclazot slot? I'm actually not convinced that it is. I think Aclazot's is probably slightly better, all things considered, in standard than this card. The lifelink is really good, but so is mostly the ability to come back over and over. This just eats a go for the throat and it's gone forever. Aclazot's doesn't do that. So again, I think Uncle Ack is probably better, but Maha is so good, and we're going to be trying it out. We are going to be trying it out. Love this Magic card. So I'm going to actually give this like a 7.9. Right? Probably because I don't know if it's actually standard playable, but it is casual, commander, perhaps even CEDH playable until the end of time. So it should have a relatively high score. Moonstone Harbinger. I love that game. 3 mana for a 1/3 bat warrior with flying and death touch. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, badge control, get +1/+0 and gain death touch till EOT. Ability only triggers once each turn because we're a bunch of losers who can't make fun cards. I don't know. There's plenty of ways to gain infinite life, right? So you can't just... You could have it gain badge control, get infinite +1/+0. You could. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, but whatever. Still good though. Honestly, deceptively good in limited, where it's, a 1/3 flying death touch. A flying death touch is always good in limited. It just always is. So you take that there. But when it's also like an anthem effect for your bats, sure. I have to give it a 4.9 because it's pretty narrow and not actually good, but it's still flying death touch. Always decent. Nocturnal Hunger up next. 3 mana for an insto. Gift of food. Destroy a creature. If you didn't promise the food, you lose 2 life. Actually okay, but 3 mana instant speed. Destroy target creature just isn't that good in standard. It's just not, but still overall solid. I'll give it a 5.1. Osteomancer Adept is 2 mana for a 2/2 squirrel warlock with death touch. If you tap it until EOT, you may cast creature spells from your yard by foraging in addition to paying their mana cost. If you cast a spell this way, that creature enters with a finality counter on it. So I think this is probably very good, but suffers the same problem as all of these, necromancer-y kind of creatures, you know what I mean? Is that this one has to wait an entire turn and has to be set up. So by the time you're set up and you play this on turn 3, turn 4, whatever it is, then your opponent has an entire turn to answer it before you can do anything with it. And I don't love that about it. That tends to actually be this massive wrench in your plan. And you can never actually tap the card, but it is a pretty big threat of activation. And even if you don't do much with it, while it is on the table and you're still setting up, it's a death touch guy. It's, if nothing else, a death touch guy. So I don't know. I think he's pretty cool, and I'm going to give him a 5.8. I think there's probably lots of stuff you can do with him, so much stuff. Persistent Marsh Stalker over here is 2 mana for a 3/1. We're at Berserker that gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. Once you have Threshold, whenever you attack with 1 or more rats, you may pay 3 mana and return Marsh Stalker from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. Better than it looks, too. I tend to love these guys that can come back from the graveyard. 7 or more cards is going to actually be tough in your rat deck. I think some of the time, maybe you surveil enough cards into your yard. This can start coming back, but I don't know. Overall, I think it's okay, and it's definitely it can attack for 6, pretty easily. So I don't know. I don't hate the card. I'll give it a 4.8. Right? Psychic Whirl is the Mind Rot variant of the set. In this case, if you control a rat, surveil 2, and also Mind Rot. 5, sure. Rotten Mouth Viper is 6 mana for a 6/6. As an additional cost to cast it, you can sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. This costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way. When it enters or attacks, it gets a blight counter. And then, for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. A lot of people going back and forth on this card so far this season. I think it is very, very good. I actually think it is one of the best cards in the entire dang old set, and it will not disappoint us. Sacrificing non-land permanents, coming down on that board presence is very, very real. I'm not going to pretend that it's not, but, other people shouldn't pretend that there's no way to get that kind of board presence early, especially we already had Novice Inspector and a couple of other, 1 mana get a token things like Case of the Filch Falcon, right? This set introduces, 4 more 1 mana create a token things. Where you get 2 permanents to sacrifice to this. So this has no shortage of, basically 1 mana for 2 permanents. So you can cast this on turn 3, super duper easy and actually not come down on that much board presence. And you have a turn 3 6/6 that has a ridiculous ETB trigger and snowballs incredibly. I feel like if this attacks for a 3rd time in the game, your opponent loses. Guaranteed. So I don't know, dude. I really like this, a lot. I think this is one of the premier new cards in the set people are going to be brewing around, and I do think that it has a real chance to actually catch. There's going to be a million cards people are brewing around in this set. Everyone's excited about it, but when it comes to what actually sticks, right, what noodles are done and will stick to the wall because, they're not undercooked garbage, this, I think, has one of the better chances of all the brewables of actually being a real competitive 1v1 card. Not just in standard again, but beyond, dude. In formats where you have cards, even more cards that can facilitate this. I really think this is something special. I do. Could be way, way, way off base on this and be super duper wrong, but this is my Arclight Phoenix call of the set. I'm calling my shot. I'm pointing towards the bleachers, and I am calling this an 8.4. I'm 100%. This card is really, really good. Ruthless Negotiation is a single black mana for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles a card from their hand. If this was cast from their graveyard, draw a card. Conveniently, it has flashback for 5 mana. This is better than it looks, but I'm not sure it's better than Hopeless Nightmare or Duress or some of the other 1 mana options you could be playing in your discard deck. So I'm not sure it makes the cut, but we will be at tryouts, so I'm going to give it a 4.9. But if it does make the cut, it's a 5.2. Cough button. Hold on. Okay, let's see. Sorry, everybody. Emergency cough button. Scales of the Shade up next. This is the lizard-specific sort of save me spell. 3 mana for an instant that costs 1 less to cast for each Lizzo you control. Target creature gets +2/+0, gains in lifelink and indestructible till end of turn. This is actually a beating. This card is a massive beating. Like +2/+0 lifelink indestructible can swing the entire game in your favor, whether you're hitting face or they blocked up on it, right? If you're going face, they cast a removal spell. Lifelink indestructible and +2/+0. Let's freaking go. Did I cast it on my slick shot? Oh my God, right? +4/+0 and lifelink. My goodness. But, if they did block up your guy, then suddenly it's almost certainly going to win that combat interaction and gain you life and stay on the table. Like for 3 mana, this is almost playable, but not quite. So if you just control 1 lizard and you get this down to 2 mana, it's kind of okay. But obviously the goal is to get it down to 1 mana. And I think there are the appropriate number of like non-embarrassing lizards you can play in standard with this card. So I actually think this has a real chance. I really do. It's not like Tyvar Stand or, something like that. But Tamiyo's Safekeeping. But I do think it's an okay Magic card. So I'm going to give it a 5.4. Scavenger's Talon is up next. This is a pretty good card, man. A single black mana for a class. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control die, make a food token. This ability triggers only once each turn. For 2 mana, you can buff it up. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target player mills 2 cards. For 3 mana, buff it up to level 3. At the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents. If you do, return a creature card from your yard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So all of these modes are okay. I really want to like the second mode more than I do, because who cares if a player mills 2 cards, but maybe you sack stuff, mill yourself, and that matters because the third mode you can like reanimate something. It is worth noting that this is a 5 mana reanimator spell, right? You got 5 mana, you can pay it all on the same turn and reanimate a guy. Okay, not terrible. So note that when you sacrifice these 3 non-land permanents, you can mill 6. Right? It's not 1 or more permanents, by the way. It's whenever you sacrifice a permanent. So yeah, sacking 3 here will mill 6 for you or your opponent. That could be pretty good. Card just does a lot, considering it gets on the table for 1 mana, right? So I actually kind of really like this. Yeah, level 2 reminds me of Ruin Crab. That's scary, isn't it? There are sacrifice loops, right? There's plenty of sacrifice loops, not necessarily in Standard, but in Commander, where this card could just be, kill everybody at the table once you get into the sack loop. But you might as well just be using like Blasting Station or whatever. But this could be extra copies of that kind of effect if you need it. Still, I really like this. And the more I look at it, the more I like it. But obviously you have to be pretty specialized, brew around the card. But it's better than it looks. Basically every mode on this does something pretty cool. So, and for a relatively low amount of mana too. So we will give this a 7.3. And I am serious? Yeah, I am. I taught myself into it. Season of Loss is the black season. 5 mana for a sorcery. You get 5 paws. With 1 paw, each player sacks a creature. 2 paws, you draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. And for 3 paws, each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your yard. This can kill them. I just love that about this. You can just 20 them with this. Again, we talked about these Souls of the Lost decks, these Cruel Somnophage decks earlier. And it's kind of neat that they now have a card that is a sweeper. You can use it as a sweeper effect. You can use it to put cards into your yard, right, by sacrificing your own dudes. You can draw more cards if you want to, but most notably, you can just 20 them, and it's not even that hard, dude. So this is like my favorite season, period. This is easily my favorite season in this entire set. I'm not sure that it's destined for too much play, but it is like kind of just a sweeper. Like on its floor, it's kind of just a sweeper. But, you know, even if they only have 3 guys. Okay, so everybody sacks 3 dudes. Maybe I draw 3 guys. Maybe I draw 3. Maybe I draw 2 or 1, depending on how many guys I had. Like, just every way to use the card looks really, really good to me. And this is one of those where, like, weirdly, you want to use the third mode the most, but it's probably the one you'll use the third mode on the least. Unless it just zaps them to death. You know what I mean? Or puts them in reach of an attack step or something. So, yeah, I actually really, really, really like this one. Also, for what it's worth, has the coolest art. If that's worth something to you. I think it is. I got to move my head, don't I? Look at that art. Look how cool that art is. So awesome. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just haul off here and give Season of Loss like a 7.3. I honestly think this card is very, very good. Like, we'll see some play. Man, it does everything. Sinister Monolith is 4 mana for an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, drain a life. If you tap it and pay 2 life and sack it, you draw 2 cards at sorcery speed. This is all right. You know, I like I've said, I like Dogged Pursuit, but I don't like it that much. I'm not going to fall for it every time I see it, right? So I'm just going to give this like a 4 because that's what it deserves. But in my heart, 6. Stargaze is up next. How good is this card? 2 black and X for a sorcery. Look at twice X cards from the top of your library. Put X from among them into your hand, the rest into your yard. You lose X life. So it throws stuff into your yard and also puts stuff into your hand. You do have to lose a lot of life, but it's relatively scalable, and once you spend like 5 mana on it, you're actually like looking at more cards, right, than you put mana into it. So interesting things about it. I've seen a lot of people go back and forth. The comment section was really divided. On the preview video where we first looked at this card, there were people who thought it was incredible, like this is my jam. There were people who thought it was just trash. And I think it does lay somewhere in the middle, so I'll give it a 5. Starlit Soothsayer is 3 mana for a 2/2 back cleric with flying. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, surveil 1. That's fine. 2.7. 3.1. Starscape Cleric is up next. 2 mana for a 2/1 back cleric with offspring for 3 mana. Has flying and cannot block. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. God, I love this card, dude. I love this card so much, and I am not going to judge it objectively. This card gets a 6.3, and I know that's ridiculously high considering some of the stuff I've given other cards. So here's the deal: 5.9. Can I? It's a 5 something. Is that okay? 5.9. Get off my back. I think this card is really good. I do. I don't think it's going to be in a ton of decks or anything, but I think it's a commander playable card forever. I really do. If nothing else, boy, you can get some combos cooking in commander, but I think you can get some combos cooking in standard too. So I'm gonna be messing around with it. We're gonna be in the kitchen. Thornblade Intimidator is 4 mana for a 4/3 rat rogue with offspring 3. When it enters, target opponent loses 3 unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. Not actually as good as it looks, but kind of the worst version of Rottenmouth Viper that you could possibly imagine. But I don't know. I'm still kind of a sucker for stuff like this, so I'll give it a 3.6. Thoughtstalker Warlock up next. 3 mana for a 2/2 lizard warlock with menace. When it enters, choose an opponent. If they lost life this turn, they reveal their hand. You choose a non-land from it. They discard that card. Otherwise, they just have to discard a card. So they always come down a card no matter what. But obviously you get to, Thoughtseize them if they lost life this turn, and that's really, really good too. You need bodies for the discard deck. I think this guy is your 3-drop along with Liliana and potentially like 2 other cards. But I think he does go in. I think he does go into mono black discard, and I think he is actually a very, very good creature in that deck. So I'm going to give this a 7.6 and never look back. I really think that even though it's a 3 mana 2/2, I think it is that good, guys. Valley Rockcaller is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/3 squirrel warlock with menace, and when it attacks, each opponent loses X and you gain X, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats you control. So pipe dream with this is obviously to swing in and deal 6 damage to the opponent before you even, get to combat damage or blocks for that matter. But I don't think that's going to happen as often as you want it to. I do think that's a little Christmas land. There are good bats. There are good lizards. There are good squirrels, right? Like you could build a decent deck with all these creature types. It'd not be too bad. And this would be a push 2 drop in that deck. So I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it is extremely narrow. And I think that like when it finally does attack, you're probably just going to get one attack in with it, you know? But again, if you're playing your cards right, literally, you might swing for 6 drain when you swing this guy in, when you finally tap him sideways. So, and for that matter, if you do have all those creatures, it does take two guys to block him down. So if you have all those creatures, that's, 5 other guys are not blocking. You know what I mean? So that's not bad. Altogether, I will give this like a 5.2, like I think it's cool in that deck, but not a whole lot of other decks. Wix Patrol is 6 mana for a 5/3. When it enters, mill 3 cards. When you do, a creature an opponent controls -X till end of turn. X being the greatest mana value among cards in your yard. Not cards that were milled. It's cards in your yard. Still way too much mana, but a massive swing in limited if you can get it to pop off right. So I'll give the card a 3.9. Wick the World Mind is 4 mana for a 2/4 legendary rat warlock, and whenever it or another rat you control enters, create a 1/1 black snail creature token if you don't control a snail. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on a snail you control. For Grixis mana and sack a snail, Wick deals damage equal to the sacked creature's power to each opponent, then draw cards equal to the sacked creature's power. Remember this when changelings come in for Lorwyn next year, and it's a really fun commander to brew around, I am so sure, but I'm not going to give it more than a 4.9 now. It'll be more than that when we get Lorwyn, but for right now, this is just cheeky commander build, 4.9. We are in red. Let's get some sips in, guys. Let's go. That is so nice. It is really nice. All right, man. We are like halfway through this thing, at least. I think we might be slightly more. Let's get it going. Agate Assault is our first red card. 3 mana for a sorcery. Choose 1, exile an artifact, or deal 4 damage to a creature and exile it if it would die. So you get like an obliterating bolt, lava coil thing, but it costs an extra mana because there's also a shatter on it. That's actually not terrible. But then they made it sorcery speed, which skunked up the whole deal, man. So I'm just going to give this a 4. And I'm serious. The modal cards like this look really good, but I'm just not convinced. Alania's Pathmaker is 4 mana for a 4/2 Otter Wizard. When it enters, exile the top of your library until end of your next turn. You may play that card. Had a person in my comment section earlier call this a Flame Tongue Kavu, and it's like, that is a way to look at this, because it's a 4 mana 4/2 that creates card advantage when it ETBs. Like, okay, maybe, but I still don't know if I'd go as far as to say Flame Tongue Kavu. I think if they reprinted Flame Tongue Kavu, but it was an otter, that'd be better than this. So Hill Giant that kind of sort of draws you a card is still kind of okay, though, in limited, but I'm just going to give it a 2.4. Artist Talent is a class for 2 mana in red. Whenever you cast a non-creature, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. 3 mana for level 2 non-creatures costs 1 less to cast for you. And for 3 mana on level 3, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So it seems like you want to be playing Burn, right? You want to cast a bunch of non-creatures. You don't want them to cast a whole lot. You want them to cast a non-creature and discard a crappy card and maybe get a new burn source, right? You want to do that. Pretty cool. You want to do extra damage with your shocks and your lightning bolts. Altogether, neat card, but way too mana intensive to actually do the things you probably want it to do most of the time. If you level it up to level 2, you have to cast like at least 3 spells to go mana neutral on the mana it took you to do that. That's kind of silly, right? So cute thing, but not any more than like a 5.1. I really don't think it is. Blacksmith Talent, on the other hand, a single red mana. When it enters the battlefield, create a colorless equipment named Sword with equipped creature gets +1/+1 and equipped 2. You can level it up to level 2 for 3 mana. At the beginning of combat on your turn, attach an equipment you control to up to 1 creature you control. For level 3, you got to pay 4 mana. During your turn, equipped creatures you control have double strike and haste. Pretty good 4th mode. I always want to say 4th mode. A pretty good level 3 on this card, but halfway decent, 2nd mode too. Again, I've already said this season, but I really like that in most cases you'd rather just pay the 3 to level it up than ever equip the sword for 2 mana. You know what I mean? But my favorite thing about this is that it's a single red mana for 2 permanents. One of them's an artifact. That is so much better than you think. For the same reason that like Case of the Filched Falcon is sometimes played, right? For all those synergistic reasons. Is that the right word? For all those synergy reasons. So I think this is subtly good even outside of equipment decks, kind of, right? So I don't know, man. Kind of like it a good bit. I'm going to give this a 5.9 or thereabouts. Blooming Blast is 2 mana for an instant. You can gift a treasure. 2 damage to a creature. If you promise the gift, you also get to blast the opponent for 3 damage. So I just tend to like stuff like this. You know, hit a creature and hit them. You don't have to choose face or body in your burn deck. But gifting a treasure is a very, very real consequence. So I can't give this more than a 4.6. Brambleguard Captain, and I mean it, Captain, Brambleguard Captain over here is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 2/3 mouse soldier at the beginning of combat on your turn. Target creature you control gets +X/+O. X is this guy's power, so kind of a Helena and Elena type style thing going on. Still not very good, super limited special on that one. 4 mana, 2/3, huh? Yikes. I'm going to give this like a 1.9. All right, we got to load the next page, which apparently takes Scryfall a second. Brazen Collector is 2 mana for a 2/1 Raccoon Rogue with first strike. When it attacks, add a red mana till end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases in. Kind of worse than it looks, because I think that in most cases, a Mana Dork would be better. In most cases. But it does have Thalia stats. You know, 2 mana, 2/1 first strike. Could be worse. So I'll give this a solid 5. Leave it at that. Byway Barterer is 3 mana for a 3/3 Raccoon Rogue with Menace. Whenever you expend 4, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. Expending 4 means you spent 4 mana to cast spells during one of your turns. It's not even one of your turns, just any turn. So that's kind of neat. This is probably better than it looks while still not actually being very good. 5.4. Conduct Electricity is 5 mana for an instant that deals 6 to a creature and up to 2 damage to a creature token. This is like a 2.1. Coruscation Mage is 2 mana for a 2/2 Otter Wizard with Offspring 2. Whenever you cast a non-creature, this guy deals a damage to each opponent. Love it. Love it. Love this guy. A whole lot, you know? He's not a Thermo Alchemist. He's not like a Kessig Flame Breather, right? But he's really, really close. He's basically those things, but he can double up, which is just, that's something you don't see every day. He's probably better than those guys because those guys can't cast extra copies of themselves. And what's the only thing better than 1 Thermo Alchemist is 2 Thermo Alchemists. So I don't know, dude. I really should be in love with this. I'll give him a 6.3. I'm serious. Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest is blurry. Why? This is 5 mana for a 5/5 legendary bird dragon with flying. When it enters or attacks, exile the top 5 or X of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You can play those cards till your next end step. If you don't play them, this thing deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards you didn't play. So could be good, but I think it's trumped by numerous, 5-drop flying guys in standard right now. Like Terror of the Peaks is better, and there's another guy that's better, whose name escapes me right now. But there's just, Bonehorde Dracosaur, yeah, which is just better than this. It just is better than this, I think. So I'm not going to score this too high, but those are good cards. That's good company to be in. So I'm going to give this a 5.9. Yeah. Emberheart Challenger is 2 mana for a 2/2 Mouse Warrior with haste and prowess, and whenever it valiants, exile the top of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play that card. So you only get the 1 turn to play the thing, but I still think this card is bonks, dude. Like 2 mana 2/2 haste prowess is just a good package in and of itself. It's kind of what you want. Probably better than Fugitive Codebreaker, right? But could still see play in the same deck as Codebreaker. The Valiant here is what's nuts. The Valiant here is nuts. Whenever you, Monstrous Rage it, you get a shot to draw another Monstrous Rage. You get a shot to draw a Lightning Strike. You get a shot to draw a Shock. Or any other ridiculous spells you might have in your deck for a low amount of mana. So I just think that, there are going to be turns where, you Monstrous Rage, which draws you a thing that targets this guy, and then you target him again in the same combat step, and then he draws you another card. Because it's not only once per turn. Very, very good Magic card that slots in day 1 to a deck and will probably be one of the better cards in that deck for like keeping the gas, to the floor. So I'm going to give this card a 7.6. It is very, very, very good. Festival of Embers is 5 mana for an enchantment. During your turn, you can cast instants and sorceries from your yard by paying a life in addition to their other costs. If a card or token would be put into your yard from anywhere, exile it instead, and if you pay 2 mana, you can sacrifice Festival of Embers to keep that from happening anymore. This is 5 mana for a really, really, really good effect. It is so good to have this effect on the table, but, you know, usually you have to skip a turn to actually get it in place. And your opponent has plenty of time to like exile stuff from your yard or your whole yard. And I don't know. It's going to feel bad when you actually try to play this. I don't have enough faith in it, but maybe it's splashy enough in Commander it actually works there. So just because it has that line of text in its text box, I'm going to give this card a 6.5. That sounds really high because it is, but that's mostly just because that line of text is notoriously incredibly good. Flamecash Gecko is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2. My God, for a 2/2 a lizard warlock, and when it enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, add black red. You can also pay 2 mana to discard a card and draw a card. This card is gross. This card is gross, man. It's not always gonna be Burning Tree Emissary, and if it's not Burning Tree Emissary, it's not actually that great, but it's okay. But it's not that great. But when you can make it Emissary, which should not be hard in an aggro deck, then suddenly it just is Burning Tree Emissary. It just is, and that's unbelievable. It's a Burning Tree Emissary that can cast good removal spells. Have you ever seen that? You know what I mean? Like I just think this card is kind of bonkers, man. So I'm going to give this a 7.6, and actually I'm going to give it a 7.7. Because I think this card is just very stupid. I think this card is stupid. Super stupid. I really do. Flame Lash over here is not actually in the main set. It's a piece of crap, too. Frilled Spark Shooter is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 3/3 Lizard Archer with Menace and Reach, and it enters with a +1/+1 counter if an opponent lost life this turn. So it's another one of these your opponent has to have lost life. There's a few of them in the set. This is cool, but just cool for limited, right? 4 mana, 4/4 2 keywords. I'll draft that sometimes. But either way, I guess we'll just throw it a 2. Harnesser of Storms is 3 mana for a 1/4 Otter Wizard. When you cast a non-creature or otter, you may exile the top of your library. Till end of turn, you can play it, but you can only do this ability once per turn, which is kind of booty holes. But I do like that in your otter deck, it triggers off of literally every card you cast, no matter what. That's pretty sick. So I'll give the card a 5. Heartfire Hero is a single red mana for a 1/1 Mouse Soldier. Whenever it Valiants, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Oh, I'm wrong, by the way, aren't I? Am I wrong? I'm wrong. I have to recuse. Hold on. Let's go back to this. Yeah, Emberheart Challenger does not trigger more than once each turn. There, I corrected myself. Delete your comment. Valiant only works once per turn, which is kind of lame. I forgot about that for a second. Sorry, everybody. But yeah, Heartfire Hero. Whenever it Valiants, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. The card's busted. Card is good. Pseudo Monastery Swift Spear that gets counters instead of just prowessing. But of course only does so once per turn. And also, Cacophony Scams. Like, my God, like, how good do you need a 1-drop red creature to be? I think this definitely stands toe-to-toe with Monastery Mentor. It doesn't have the Monastery Swift Spear, rather. If it doesn't have the haste, I get the whatever. I get it. Whatever. Who cares? It's actually a big deal, but it doesn't have the haste. But I still think this grows pretty fast. Wears a monstrous rage really, really well, and does a ton of damage if your opponent does do something about it. I think this is destined to see some standard play in mice, if nothing else. But I really think Mono Red wants the guy. I think they want to recruit him. So I'll give the card a 7. Hearthborn Battler. Did I just give this a 7? I'll give this card a 7.48. Hearthborn Battler is up next. 3 mana for a 2/3 Lizard Warlock with haste. When a player casts their second spell each turn, Battler deals 2 damage to target opponent. This is really good. I think this card is actually really, really good. I don't know if you play it above other 3-drops that you have access to in Mono Red right now, and I think that the Mono Red deck is probably going to morph into a more pared down, like 1 and 2 mana only Swift Spear, Slick Shot kind of deck, that mostly has 1 and 2 mana instants and sorceries too. So I'm not sure the card is in the proper standard to see play, but this is actually a better looking, I think, 3-drop than it looks like. It's only a 2/3, but the haste will help with that, and I think that this is probably going to provide, 4, 6, 8 extra damage over the course of a game if it's not dealt with. Because if you drop it on 4, you can just play a shock and deal 2 damage to them immediately. That's cool. But it also triggers off of your opponents casting their second spell each turn, and that happens a lot. So that could be really annoying for them. I'm going to give this a 6.1. I think it's pretty decent. Hired Claw is 1 red mana for a 1/2 lizard mercenary. Whenever you attack with one or more lizards, it deals a damage to target opponent. You can also pay 2 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on this guy, but activate only if an opponent lost life this turn and only once this turn, or only once each turn. So grows pretty slowly and actually takes a good amount of damage or a good amount of mana to grow it. But if nothing else, it's a mana sink you can use. And cool thing about this is that it's 1 damage to opponents, whenever anything attacks, like whenever it attacks too. It's going to deal a damage to opponent, which facilitates all these your opponent has to have lost life this turn kind of things. I like that about it. It also facilitates things like light up the stage in other formats, right? That's pretty cool. Or like the bolt, I forget what it's called, but it's like 3 mana for 3 damage to a target. At sorcery speed, or if you've spectacled that turn, it's 1 mana. It's literally like lightning bolt at sorcery speed. And this works kind of well with that too. So neat card. I'm going to give it a 6. Hoarder's Overflow is 2 mana for an enchantment. Whenever it enters and whenever you expend 4, put a stash counter on it. You can pay 2 and sack it to discard your hand and draw that many cards. The number of cards equal to the stash counters on it. This isn't super good. I do think it's kind of interesting that if you play it on turn 4 and then play another 2 mana card, you'll immediately have 2 stash counters on it, which is cool, but I still think this is slower and worse than a lot of the effects that are in standard that are already like this. So just not a huge fan. I'll give it a 5.1. Kindle Spark Duo over here is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 1/3 lizard otter. You can tap it for a damage to an opponent, and whenever you cast a non-creature, you can untap it. So Thermo Alchemist, but mostly worse than Thermo Alchemist, but still have to give my buddy a 5.1. Manifold Mouse right here, which you do have the card image for, you liars, is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/2 mouse soldier with Offspring 2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, a mouse you control gains your choice of double strike or trample until end of turn. So bonkers in the mouse deck. It can give itself double strike or trample. If you did Offspring it, double strike and trample is a nutso combination, especially if somebody has high enough power. So the card could be good, but it looks to be good specifically in mice. So I got to dock it a few points, but I'm still going to give it a 5.8. It is very good. Might of the Meek is 1 mana for an instant. Target creature gains trample till end of turn. It also gets +1/+0 till end of turn if you have a mouse. Draw a card. So charge through, but a little bit better in the correct color and might actually see play in the Valiant deck, but more likely in the Swiftspear deck, where this targets a creature. Could potentially give it a power boost and also always draws a card for a single mana at instant speed. That's a better Magic card than it looks like. I promise you. I'm going to give this a 6, and I'm serious. Pretty good. Empujon de Broma over here is 2 mana, 1 and a red. Are you serious, Scryfall? We've got the full set. Oh, it's Playful Shove. Okay, it's Playful Shove. 2 mana for a sorcery, deals damage to any target. Draw a card is what this does. That's a good Magic card. I regret to inform you that's actually a pretty good Magic card. By the way, McMedic 130, thanks for your Prime sub. I've got a lot of people to point out, and I will get to you when I'm done with all of this. I promise. I will say your name on stream. And I will appreciate greatly all of the help that you've given me in the stream. Thank you very much, just in advance. But I will say your names in a moment. Empujon de Broma. Playful Shove is actually okay. I don't think you're playing it in too many decks, but 2 mana, draw a card, deal a damage is better than anyone thinks it is. So I'm going to give the card a 5. Quake Tusk Boar is 5 mana for a 5/5 reach, trample, haste. No one's paying attention to this, and they shouldn't. Okay. But you know what this reminds me of in a weird way? Like, and what I mean by that is it might be just as playable and limited as this card was too. Colossal Dreadmaw, 6 mana, 6/6 trample, right? This is a 5 mana, 5/5 trample with 2 other abilities. One of them is haste. Is this actually a massive beating? In limited, is this actually kind of a massive beating at the top end of your aggro deck? I kind of like this card, specifically for limited. I'm going to give it a 3.1. Rabid Gnaw is 2 mana for an instant. A creature you control gets +1/+0 till end of turn and then bites something. If you can't tell by the art, which you can't because my head's right there. But yeah, you see that? Oh my God, it's freakish. We're going to give this a good score, actually. 5.68 for Rabidnaw. This is super, super good. Let's look at Raccoon Rallier. 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 Raccoon Bard. You can tap it to have a creature you control gain haste at sorcery speed. It's fine for limited, 2.6. Reptilian Recruiter is 5 mana for a 4/2 Lizard Warrior with trample. When it enters, you choose a creature. If its power is 2 or less, or if you control another lizard, gain control of that creature till end of turn, untap it, gain haste till end of turn. The threaten effect, but this time on a body of the set. I actually do kind of like this a good bit, but mostly just limited playable, right? So I'll give this a 3.1. Season of the Bold is 5 mana for a sorcery. Choose up to 5 paws. On 1 paw, you can create a tapped treasure token. 2 paws, exile the top 2 of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play them. 3 paws. Until the end of your next turn, whenever you cast a spell, Season deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. So I wish this was to any target. I really feel like they kind of chickened out on this one. This could be any target, and if you do kill your opponent the turn after you play a 5 mana red sorcery, I feel like you earned it, right? But still, I kind of like this, but I still think it's one of my least favorite of the seasons. But my favorite idea with this is just 5 mana, make 5 treasures. Huh? That's good, right? 5 mana, make 5 treasures could like potentially be pretty good. So I can't hate this card. 5.2. Steam Path Charger right here is 2 mana for a 2/1 Offspring 2. And when it dies, it deals damage to a player. That's fine. 1.7. Storm Splitter is what we're ending up calling this card. 4 mana for a 1/4 Otter Wizard with haste. When you cast an instant or sorcery, you get a token that's a copy of Splitter. Exile the token at the beginning of the next end step. Note that means you cast an instant or sorcery, you get a token copy. You cast an instant or sorcery, you get 2 token copies. You cast an instant or sorcery, you get 4 token copies. Cast an instant or sorcery, you get 8 token copies. Yeah, so it doesn't actually take that many instant or sorceries with this thing on the table to end up dealing a ton of damage. Do keep it in mind. But overall, I just think it's too cute. I really do think it's too cute. 5. Sunspine Lynx is 4 mana for a 5/4 elemental cat. Players cannot gain life, and damage can't be prevented. When it enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basics that player controls. Card is hot. Jeez, that was a terrible noise. That was my keyboard moving on my desk. Card is hot. Not just a pun. The card is extremely, extremely good. Again, I feel like in some ways one of the better cards of the set, not just for 1v1, but like obviously Commander, where it deals a buttload to everybody when it drops. But even in Standard, I feel like you resolve this and it's dealing a bunch of damage just right up front. And suddenly all of their life gain stuff doesn't work. And there's actually a significant amount of that in Standard. So if Red's going to play 4-drops ever again in Standard, I think this is probably the thing they're going to play. But again, even if they can't, Commander card forever, and a very, very good one at that. So one of those cards is just kind of simple and very good. Simple and clean, right? Like Kingdom Hearts. So I'm going to give this like a 7.9, maybe even an 8. I might give this an 8, but I don't think it quite breaks it. 7.94. Next is Take Out the Trash. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. Deals 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. If you control a raccoon, you can discard a card. If you do that, you get to draw a card. Cool. Just a fine card. 5.1. Up next is another card that must be translated. Scryfall. What's wrong? Are you okay, Scryfall? This is Teapot Slinger. Oh, yeah. This is the 4 mana, 3/4 menace. Whenever you expend 4, it deals 4 damage. It deals 2 damage to each opponent. If it dealt 4, we'd be talking, but instead, spend 4 mana, it deals 2 to each opponent. Kind of cute in multiples, because if you have one on the table, cast a multiple, that'll deal 2 damage. If you expend 4 after that, again, then that'll do 4 damage. So like cute in multiples, but still not incredible. If anything, we've just got a limited deck cooking that plays, the guy that has Offspring and is Kessig Flame Breather, the 3 mana duo that just is Thermo Alchemist, and now you have this, right? So cute limited deck, like a limited burn deck. I don't think it goes farther than that, though. 3. Valley Flamecaller is the card's name. This is 3 mana for a 3/3 Lizard Warlock. If a lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage, +1 instead. So, neat, man. It counts itself, too, because it's a lizard. It doesn't say another on it anywhere. So, it will hit for 4. And it will hit anything for 4, even if it gets blocked. It hits the creature that blocked it for 4 damage, which is cool. But this could potentially push a ton of damage in an aggro deck or a changelings deck too. Keep that in mind. So I like the guy a good bit. 6.2. Valley Rally up next. 3 mana for an instant. Gift a food if you want to. Creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. If the gift was promised, target creature you control gains first strike till end of turn. Blow them out, dude. Cool limited card, and I like a Burn Bright, but 4.1. War Squeak is a single red mana for an aura that enchants a creature. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls can't block this turn. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. So this is just Hammerhand. What do you give Hammerhand? 5.3. Whisker Quill Scribe is 2 mana for a 2/2 mouse citizen, and it Valiant. Whenever it does so, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Not too impressive, 2.1. Wildfire Howl is 3 mana for a sorcery where you gift a card. It deals 2 damage to each creature. If the gift was promised, Wildfire deals 1 damage to any target and 2 to each creature instead. Probably not going to be worth gifting a card sometimes, but if you can take out their 3 toughness guy, sure. Not actually that great, but a pretty massively good card in this limited environment specifically, where it blows away most of the creatures. So I guess I'll give this a 4.6. Something like that. Baker's Bane Duo. We are at green. Let me take a sip. Can I sip it? Can I sip it, baby? I think this card sucks. Were you talking about Sunspine or the Red Season, I wonder? Hard to say. I don't think Sunspine can be said to suck. The Red Season probably sucks. Say that. All right. The raccoon has a propeller beanie. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. This is just Yogi and Boo Boo over here. We got 2 mana for a 1 green for a 2/2 squirrel raccoon. This is Baker's Bane Duo, by the way. This 2 mana 2/2 enters and makes a food token, and when you expend 4, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn. I am still raw that it's not a counter. It really should be a counter, dude, but who cares? It's not terrible. It's a probably mostly worse Tough Cookie, and Tough Cookie's like a 6.3, so let's give this a 6.2. Bark Knuckle Boxer is 2 mana for a 3/2 Raccoon Berserker. Whenever you expend 4, Boxer gains indestructible until end of turn. It's not that great, but it's honestly not that bad either. You know, it's not too hard to expend 4 in your Stompy deck, and until then, it's a 2 mana 3/2 that attacks pretty well. Trades with 3 drops. I mean, you'll take the card. 5.3. Brambleguard Veteran is 3 mana for a 3/4 Raccoon Warrior. When you expend 4 raccoons you control, get +1/+1, gain Vigilance till EOT. The body on this is actually pretty good. You know, a 3 mana 3/4. I guess you'll take that some of the time, but I wish this was just an always Anthem effect you didn't have to turn on. Expending 4 isn't going to happen every turn, so I'll just give it like a 4.7. Bushy Bodyguard is 2 mana for a 2/1 Squirrel Warrior Offspring 2. When it enters, you can forage. If you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Okay. So if you're foraging, what is that? 4 mana for 4, 5, 6, 7 total power? That's pretty good. The more I look at this, the more I'm like, this is decent and limited, isn't it? This is okay and limited. I'll give it a 3.6. I'm serious. That's the kind of body you want. Cash Grab over here. Good name for a card. 2 mana for an instant. Mill 4. Put a permanent card from among the cards you milled into your hand. If you control a squirrel or returned a squirrel card to your hand this way, you get to make a food token. Even if you don't have the squirrel extra text on this, it's still instant speed. Put 4 into your yard and get, card selection out of it, which is fantastic. That is probably just as good or better even a lot of times than Grizzly Salvage, which is a card that these kind of mid-range graveyard value decks just need, and they don't have access to a lot of cards like this right now. So it might actually find a spot, and I wouldn't be surprised. 5.7. Clifftop Lookout. Good card. 3 mana for a 1/2 Frog Scout with reach. When it enters, reveal cards from the top until you reveal a land. Put the card onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So none of this, look at the top 5 or 6 cards of your library. None of this got to get a basic land. This is just reveal until you hit a land. Doesn't matter what land it is, basic or not. Throw it onto the table, kid. This is a really, really, really good Magic card. Like, really good, guys. I promise you. I'm going to give this a 6.99. Almost a 7. And it probably deserves that 7. 3 mana is kind of a lot, especially for just a 1/2 body. But this will block Deep Cavern Bats in Standard. I think that's kind of interesting. Look at that wrinkle. But overall, this is just going to be a card that probably sees at least Commander play. And as again, just a really good value 3. It's just a fantastic value 3 drop. Colossification up next. This is not in the main set, but I still want to score it. 9.5. It's not worth that, but in my heart, it is. Curious Forager is 3 mana for a 3/2 Squirrel Druid, and when it enters, you may forage. When you do, return a permanent from your yard to your hand. It's not Eternal Witness. It's not actually that good at all, but in draft, I think it's got a lot of work to do, so I'm going to give the card a 4. Druid of the Spade up next. 3 mana for a 2/3 Rabbit Druid. If you control a token, it's a 4/3 Trample instead. That's fine. 2.3. Fecund Green Shell is 5 mana for a 4/6 Elemental Turtle with Reach. If you have 10 or more lands, all of your guys get +2/+2. And whenever Green Shell or another creature you control with toughness greater than its power enters, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, put it into your hand, kid. So, actually a really, 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 really good-looking Magic card to me. The Enter the Battlefield trigger is great. Almost always gets you something, right? It's going to get you a card in your hand. It's going to draw you a card without Shieldred triggering. But it also ramps you some of the time. That's both good modes. 6 toughness is insurmountable in this format. Nothing can break that in this format. And I think that, like, note that if you do, like, let's say you play this and then you play a Sheoldred. Well, that has toughness greater than its power, right? You play a Preacher of the Schism. Well, that has toughness greater than its power, right? There's a lot of really good creatures in this format, toughness greater than their power. Sentinel of the Nameless City, that has toughness greater than its power, and these are all really good creatures. So, like, all of them being able to ramp you, you'll get to that, 10 landmark sooner than you think. I think this is a great mid-range creature. I don't know if it's worth the slot above other things you could be playing as your 5-drop creature in these decks, but I don't know, dude. If you're looking for value, I think this provides a ridiculous amount of it, and, like, always at least replaces itself. That's what you want, and is actually super hard to remove outside of just straight up kill that guy, black removal, right? So I'm kind of a little bit in love with this, but also trying to temper my expectations because it is a 5-drop, But overall, I'm going to give it a 6.9. Nice. For the common, good is 2x and a green for a sorcery. Create X tokens that are copies of a token you control. These tokens you control gain indestructible until your next turn. You gain 1 life for each token you control. My goodness. So there's a couple of things about this, okay? They gain indestructible until your next turn. Not till end of turn, until your next turn. It's really, really neat. Note that you can't cast it like instant speed. It is a sorcery, but if you can engineer a way to cast it at instant speed, it gets much, much better. This is cool, man. This is really cool. Like, scalable token copying. The life gain incidentally might do something for you. It looks like there might be one, like, very specific commander combo that's nuts with this, or multiple. So I don't want to score this too low because the effect is so unique and so kind of game breaking in the right kind of setup that I don't actually think this card is terrible. I don't think it really finds a home in Standard, but if it does, there's going to be a reason for it. That said, I don't think that's going to happen, but I also don't think this card is bad, and the extremely specialized uses that it does have make it the best card in the decks that it is built around, like almost certainly. So you can get up to no good with it pretty easily. I'm going to give it a 4.6. Galewind Moose is up next. Everyone's favorite guy. Strictly Better Colossal Dreadmaw. What are they doing to us? 6 mana for a 6/6 Flash, Vigilance, Reach, Trample. Like a questing beast. Like, how many different abilities you throw on this guy, man? Like, 6 mana, 6/6 Flash, Vigilance, Reach, Trample is like as close as a 6-drop gets to being standard playable without actually being standard playable. I've heard people say that it is. I don't think so. But it is maybe like the card to look out for in draft in this set. So I'm going to give this like a 4.9. Let's do it. Hazard Root Herbalist up next. Giant Growth is not in the main set, but it is playable in standard. Giant Growth always gets a 6. Hazard Root Herbalist, it does. Hazard Root Herbalist is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 1/4 Rabbit Druid. Whenever you attack, a creature you control gets +1/+0 till end of turn. If it's a token, it gets Death Touch too. Pretty cool. Pretty cool and limited, man. 3.7. Hive Spine Wolverine is a nightmare if you look at the art too long. 5 mana for a 5/4 Wolverine, Elemental Wolverine. When it enters, do one of these things. Either put a +1/+1 counter on a thing you control, or Wolverine fights a creature token, or destroy an artifact or enchantment. This card's kind of really good. It really is. It just does a ton of stuff. No matter what, when it comes into play. Sucks that it only fights creature tokens. If it could fight a creature and also bust up artifacts or enchantments, like you choose one of those, I think this would be a phenomenal Magic card, like worthy of being the 5-drop in a lot of green decks. But as it is, sideboard at best, but probably not even that. Still got to give it a 5.2 though. because it's actually really good when you just look at all the stuff it does. It's a good card. Honored Dray Leader is 3 mana for a 1/1 Squirrel Warrior with Trample. When it enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter for each other squirrel and or food that you control. And whenever another squirrel or food you control enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So can be pretty big the turn you play it. Gets exponentially large as the game goes on. If you don't even play a 1-drop and you play the 2-drop squirrel that puts a food onto the table when it enters and when it dies, then this can always come in as like a 3 mana 3/3 trample. So it's at least like kind of on curve, if that's the play you're making. I like that. But, you know, you can obviously play a 1-drop squirrel, and this is a 3 mana 4/4 trample. That's good. So this gets larger than it might initially appear. And in Commander, good lord, does it get very, very large, you know, after like a Chatter Storm or something like that. So I kind of actually really like this, and I'll give it a 5.6. Hunter's Talent is 2 mana for a class. Let me move my head real quick. This, on its first mode, is whenever it enters, a creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a thing you don't control, so a bite effect. On level 2, which costs 2 mana, whenever you attack, a creature you control gets +1/+0, gains trample till end of turn. And on level 3, which costs 4 mana, at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature power 4 or greater, draw a card. Why does this art kind of remind me of like scary stories to tell in the dark? Do you guys remember those books? There were 3 of them. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. There was a movie a few years ago based on those books. I did not see the movie, but the books used to scare the crap out of me, and mostly because of the illustrations. And for some reason, Kisun Ko, you did a good job on the art, but for some reason, it's hitting the part of my brain that remembers Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and it's kind of freaking me out a little bit. So I'm going to cover it back up. This is okay. It's a bite effect for 2 mana, which may be sorcery speed, but a bite effect that also gives you an enchantment. And for 2 extra mana, you get a kind of like Luminarch Aspirant-y, fight rigging kind of ability, and that's always good too. So if you never pump the 4 into it, I still think it's okay. But if you do, it's card advantage too. Just card's actually really, really good. I'm going to give it a 6. Totally serious, dude. Hard painted in watercolor is why. Yeah, it's probably just the exact same like style, you know? But Innkeeper's Talent is 2 mana for a class as well. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. That just is fight rigging. That just is Luminarch Aspirant. On level 2, you can pay a green mana. Permanents you control with counters on them have ward 1. Level 3 costs 4. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many instead. All the modes on this are really good too, you know. I will say, I don't know if it's quite worth playing it in Stompy. I don't know if you want to spend your turn 2 to not play a body, right? So there are like real concerns with the card, but in Commander it looks pretty decent. Ward 1 is a real ability, and it only costing 1 mana to level it up is also a very real consideration when you're judging this card. I don't think that it's incredible, but I do think that it's playable. 6.3. Keen-Eyed Curator is 2 mana for a 3/3 Raccoon Scout with upside. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards exiled with Curator, it gets +4/+4 and has trample, and you can pay 1 to exile a card from a yard. So a Scavenging Ooze, again, I think it's very clever, but it's a Scavenging Ooze because it's a raccoon and they scavenge. So cute, good design, whoever did that. But yeah, potential 7/7 trample for your 2 mana investment, but you know, by then you would have invested 6 mana into it. So there is that, but still, I like a 2 mana card that gets better as the game goes on. This has very, very real, you know, consequences to its activated ability. Your opponent can't reanimate stuff as easily. You can use the ability at instant speed. You know, they can't do any funny business out of their yard. That's just a good ability to have access to. But aside from that, you know, it growing is incredible too. It just becomes enormous eventually. So I'm going to give this card a 7.4, a 7.8. I'm going to give this card a 7.8. Just much strictly better Watch Wolf by a million. Yes, we'll do it. We've already seen a few of those, right? We had the 2 mana, the green 3/3 a couple of sets ago. And it was fine. It was in Stompy decks, you know. I probably would have given it like a 7 point something too. So I'm not going to really fret too hard. This card deserves a high score. Longstalk Brawl is a green mana for a sorcery where you gift a tapped fish. Choose a creature you control and a creature you don't control. If the gift was promised, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature you control. Then those creatures fight each other. Prey upon with extra steps. Strictly better. Prey upon. That's okay. So, well, is prey upon bite or fight? I can't remember now. Either way, I'm going to give this a 4.8. It's an okay. Well, no, if it's strictly better, like just normal fight effect, 5. Lumra, Bellow of the Woods, is 6 mana for a star elemental bear with vigilance and reach, and its PT is equal to the lands you control. When it enters mill 4, and then Splendid Reclamation. Return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. We don't talk about this card very much. It was one of the first cards spoiled from the set, and it is a massive beast. This is a great reanimation target, first of all. First and foremost. But even if you're just ramping into it, it's pretty good in that way too. Could actually make the, World Souls Rage deck a little bit better after rotation, after it loses all the good lands, like this is at least something that goes into it. But I think just a self-mill deck that ends up reanimating this somehow, getting all of its lands back, and then maybe using Iridescent Vine Lasher to landfall your opponent to death. Like, these are all ideas. So I like Lumber. I think that there are definitely things that will be done in Standard with her, but whether it makes the cut of the top tier, I'm not too sure, right? But I'll still give the card a 7. Mistbreath Elder is a single green mana for a 2/2 Frog Warrior. At the beginning of your upkeep, return another creature you control to its owner's hand. You must do that if you control another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Elder. Otherwise, you can return Elder to its owner's hand. So you don't ever have to return this to your hand, but boy, you can get up to shenanigans, baby. This is kind of Nurturing Pixie-esque. But Nurturing Pixie is non-land permanence when it enters, whereas this is just creatures, less spread of card type, but it can do it more often. So I think this is going to set up tricks more than it's going to actually be like a stompy creature, but it is a 1-mana 2/2, so it's got real power and toughness on it as well. I'm going to give this a 6.6. Overprotect, it's probably more than that. It probably, just because of the tricks in Commander, it's probably better than that. Overprotect is 2 mana for a giant growth that also gives the creature trample, hexproof, and indestructible. I will also give this a 6.6. Overprotect is really good, dude. That's a really good Magic card. I think that it's a good reason to make the Slickshot decks green-red, instead of blue-red or just mono-red. This is a phenomenal card in Slickshot decks. It doesn't deserve a 6.6 though, 6.2. Paw Patch Formation here is 2 mana, 1 to green for an instant. Choose 1, destroy a creature with flying, or bust up an enchantment, or draw a card and create a food. This card is nuts. my crazy. This card is so good, dude. You're always going to be able to do something with it. Literally. There's not a dead mode on the card. Just 2 mana, draw a card, get a food is actually kind of good. That's actually kind of good. Especially depending on if you can leverage the food somehow. So, crazily, I'm going to give this card a 7.5. I'm so serious. I'm going to give it a 7.5. Paw Patch Recruit is a single green mana for a 2/1 Rabbit Warrior with Offspring 2 and Trample. Whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control other than that creature. There is no downside. You might be waiting for downside on an Offspring Savannah Lions with Trample. Yeah, it's got a keyword ability. It's got a triggered ability. It's got Offspring, so it's not terrible if you draw it late. Good God, the 1-drops in this set, dude. The 1-drops in this set, buddy. I'm going to give this a 7.1. And it might deserve more than that. Peerless Recycling is 2 mana, 1 to green for an instant, where you can gift a card. Return a permanent card from your yard to the hand. If you promise to gift, instead you get 2 permanent cards from your yard to your hand. This card is also really good. I feel like if you set yourself up to get the 2 best cards in your deck or the 2 best cards in your yard back, then it's worth, remaining at card parity and gifting a card to be able to play this, especially at instant speed. This is an instant. If this was a sorcery, I think we might still almost be talking, but not really. But at instant speed, yeah, that's not bad at all, man. Really, really good card selection for what it's worth. It's kind of worth a lot. A little bit of a sleeper here. I'm going to give it a 6.8. Moving on. We are almost there, dude. 181 of 240 of 262 cards, and a lot of these cards are going to be basic lands and stuff too. Polywallop up next. 4 mana for an instant that costs 1 less to cast for each frog you control. A creature you control bites something twice. It double bites something. Actually really, really slick, but obviously only good in frog decks and changeling decks, so 5. Rabid Bite. What do you give Rabid Bite? A 5. Rabid Bite is a 5. Rush Shield Rampager is 4 mana for a 4/4 Raccoon Warrior with Offspring 2 that can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Is card a 2? It's limited. 2.6. It's a 4 mana 4/4 with upside. Scrap Shooter, a 3 mana 4/4 though. What's better than a 4 mana 4/4? 3 mana 4/4 where it has reach and you can gift a card. When it enters, if the gift was promised, Reclamation Sage. Destroy an artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. How good do you need your magic cards to be? This good? You need them to be better than this? You know what I mean? Why? 7.6. This card is so good. Honestly, I'll give this card a 7.9 because in Commander, it's busted. You give the card to whoever you want to and just blow up the best artifact or enchantment on the table. That's good. Season of Gathering over here, probably the worst season, is 6 mana for 5 paws. For 1 paw, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. It gains Vigilance and Trample TOT. On 2 paws, you choose an artifact or enchantment, destroy all permanents of the chosen type. On 3 paws, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures that you control. If this was 5 mana, it would have been extremely playable for the overrun effect and the ability to just bust up, what is it, Shatterstorm and Tranquility at the same time? Like both of those cards at the same time. That's pretty good. So Commander, like potentially playable, but I don't know that it even is there. So I'm just going to give the card a 5.1 because there's definitely ways it could have a lot of effect on the table, but I'm not sure it's worth the slot in your deck. But Sticky Tongue Sentinel, I could be wrong. Sticky Tongue Sentinel is 3 mana. For a 3/3 Frog Warrior with Reach, when it enters, return up to one other target non-land permanent you control. Yeah, just one other target permanent you control to its owner's hand. I never noticed that. It doesn't say non-land. Just return up to one other target permanent. Huh. So, you don't have to return anything if you don't want to, but also you could return a tapped land and replay it. That option makes the card slightly better. A little bit. But honestly, it's still not that great. There are cool things you can do. It's a 3 mana Nurturing Pixie, and it's not good. So I'm just going to give the card a 4.1. Stocking the Pantry. I don't think we've looked at this yet. This is a green mana for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, this thing gets a supply counter. You can pay 2 and remove a supply counter from it to draw a card. Not bad, mostly for Commander. I think it's a little overpriced to use the activated ability in Standard for the most part. But still, neat card. Again, for Commander +1/+1 counter decks, I think that they're always looking for more card advantage. And they don't mind a mana sink from time to time either. And they'll love the cute art. So I'm going to give this a 5.7. Sunshower Druid is a green mana for a 0/2. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, you gain a life. Probably the single best thing to be bouncing with your other frogs. You can get one or two frogs just huge. You can gain a bunch of life. That actually works with all the bats in the set that want you to gain life too. So you get frogs and bats working together. You're cooking. Just all together really, really neat. It's a nice piece of glue for the limited environment, but it's not that great outside of that. I'll give it a 3.2. Tender Wild Guide is 2 mana for a 2/2 Possum Druid with Offspring to tap it for a mana of any color or tap it to give itself a +1/+1 counter. Neat that it's a 2 mana dork that can be a 4 mana double dork. And that's cool, but I'm not going to give it more than a 6.1. Thorn Vault Forager. Keep doing that. It's 2 mana for a 2/2 Squirrel Ranger. Tap to add a green or tap Forage to get 2 mana in any combination of colors. Or there's more. Pay 4 and tap it to search your library for a squirrel. Reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle. Go get your Toski, kid. Altogether, this is a sweet card. I like this a little bit more even though this guy that can double ramp you seems really, really good. I think he is, though. I'll give him a 6.1. This guy, I will give a 6.2. Being able to tap for 2 mana is busted. That is very, very good. 3, and it just goes in every squirrel deck forever, right? Every squirrel deck in Commander, auto include. 3 Tree Scribe, though, is 2 mana for a 2/3 Frog Druid. Whenever it or another creature you control leaves the battlefield without dying, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Neat little thing for blink decks and bounce decks. And it's a 2 mana 2/3, so it's not embarrassing in terms of stats already. I'm going to give the card a 4.9. Scratch that, 5.1. Tree Guard Duo is 4 mana for a 3/4 Frog Rabbit. When it enters until end of turn, a creature you control gets Vigilance and +X, X being the number of creatures you control. I really want this to be Crater Hoof, but it's just not. But that said, in Limited, there's a ton of unblockable creatures, right? Or ways creatures can go unblockable. And this looks pretty interesting with that if you have a bunch of token creatures in play. So neat little 1/2 for Limited to keep in mind for Simic or whatever. But I'm not going to give it more than a 2.7. Treetop Sentries is 4 mana for a 2/4 Squirrel Archer with Reach. And when it enters, you may forage. If you do, draw a card. It's okay. A giant spider that can draw you a card, I feel like I have to give a 3.9 to. No, I don't. I can give it a 3.4 and feel fine. I can sleep at night. Valley Might Caller. I can even give it a 2.9, but drawing you a card is good. 3.4. Valley Might Caller is a single green mana for a 1/1 frog warrior with trample. Whenever another frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control enters, this guy gets a +1/+1 counter. So, like a champion of the parish or champion of the perished. But it works off 4 different creature types. I love this guy. He's not as tricky as some of the other 1-drops we've seen in the set, but he's going to get huge, and he has baked-in trample. This guy's awesome. He doesn't just trigger once per turn, right? There are cards in the set that create more than 1 rabbit at a time. And obviously, he goes really well with like Chatterstorm or whatever and Commander too, for what that's worth. I just think this dude's cool, like very, very, very cool and very strong. Again, what is it with the 1-drops in this set? 7. Wear Down is 2 mana for a sorcery where you gift a card. Destroy an artifact or enchantment. If you promise them that card, instead you get to destroy 2 artifacts or enchantments. Sorcery speed does kill this for me, but I'm still going to give it a 5. We are in the gold cards. I can take a sip and a second. Hold on, everybody. How you doing? Oh my goodness. We're in the home stretch, everybody. Castrol, the Wind Crested, is 5 mana for a 4/5 legendary bird scout. Whenever one or more birds you control deal combat damage to a player, you can either draw a card or put a +1/+1 counter on all your birds, or you can put a bird creature card from your hand or yard onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. That is a really good mode if you've got enough birds. But even if it's the only bird in your deck, it draws cards. It gets larger as it goes through. So I kind of like it. I don't think it's going to be like, the control finisher in a deck anytime soon in standard, but it's pretty cool. I'm going to give it like a 6. It probably doesn't deserve. Yeah, it does. I'll give it a 6. Plume-Creed Mentor is 3 mana for a 2/3 bird scout with flying. And whenever it or another creature you control with flying enters, it gets a +1, or you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control that does not have flying. Do you see? Just a draft special, but a pretty decent card altogether. So I guess it's like a much, much, much better Windrake, 3 mana, 2/3 flyer with upside. So I don't know. I'll give it like a 4. Seed Pod Squire is 4 mana for a 3/3 bird scout with flying. And when it attacks a creature you control without flying, gets +1/+1 till end of turn. Strictly better Phantom Monster. We got there, everybody. Let's give it a 2.6. Mind Drill Assassin is 4 mana. 2 and 2 Dimir hybrids for a 2/5 Rat Warlock. You can pay 3 mana to surveil 1, or you can Threshold. As long as you have Threshold, Assailant gets +3/+0. You get 5/5 for 4 mana. That's a Juzam Djinn that can surveil. Oh my god, let's give it a 2.8. Tidecaller Mentor is 3 mana for a 3/3 Rat Wizard with Menace, and it has Threshold. When it enters, if you have Threshold, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So, a little bounce effect with your Threshold. Neat limited card. Mana War is not what it used to be, though. But Mana War used to just be a 2/2. Now it's a 3/3 with a keyword ability. How good do you need your Mana War to be? I'll give this card a 4. Ren the Relentless is 4 mana, 2 a blue and a black for a 3/4 legendary rat rogue. It has Ward 2. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it. At the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature gets +1/+1 for each other rat you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. So that's the beginning of each end step. That means you can get in for combat. If you kill stuff in combat, you make a couple of rats. They get pretty big, right? So pretty good. If you ever make 2 rats with this, I'm pretty sure those rats both are 3/3s, because this is a rat and they each see 1 other rat. And that's just making 2 rats. There are turns where you can play this the same turn you play a sweeper on enough mana, and then yikes, right? But aside from that, if you just kill your opponent's creature with a go for the throat during their combat step, you'll get a rat, a 2/2 rat, if you have no other rats besides this guy. So, I don't know. I keep talking myself into this dude. As far as 4-drops go, I don't think he's better than Urtai or Sheldred or a couple of other options even. But, again, he's in the top 5, blue-black or even just black or blue 4-drops in the upcoming format. So, I want to like him and I want to score him high. So, I guess I'm going to do that. 7.2. I like him a lot. Cindering Cutthroat is 3 mana, 2 and a Rakdos hybrid for a 3/2 Lizard Assassin. Cindering Cutthroat enters with a +1/+1 counter if an opponent lost life this turn. You can pay 2 mana to have Cutthroat gain menace till end of turn. Just kind of a normal guy, honestly. He could be a 3 mana 4/3, who cares? 1.4. Fireglass Mentor is 2 mana, Rakdos colors, for a 2/1 Lizard Warlock. At the beginning of your second main, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 of your library, choose 1 until end of turn, you can play that card. So, good card selection. You have end of turn to play it, so I wish it was still end of next turn, but whatever. Whatever. It's still okay. If you are playing Lizards, and if you are playing Outlaws, for that matter, it's both of those things, and you probably do want to play it. So, altogether, I have to give this like a 5.2. Gev, Scaled Scorch, if you're looking at, lizards that cost a black and a red, this is a better one. 2 mana for a 3/2 Lizard Mercenary. It's legendary, and has Ward, pay 2 life. Other creatures you control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. Whenever you cast a Lizard spell, Gev deals 1 damage to target opponent. This is pretty cool, man. Again, there's a lot of incentive to play Lizards if you just want to deal incremental damage. They certainly do, and I want to do that. So, I don't know, Lizard Outlaws looks like a pretty interesting deck coming up because you get some cool cards from Outlaws at Thunder Junction. You get some cool cards from this set. They all deal, incremental damage or whatever, and I think that that's actually a neat way to get some reach in this upcoming format. I don't know if it beats Sunfall or anything, but, this is at least a fairly static creature with an actual ward cost that does 2 other really relevant things. So I'm going to give it a 6.8. It's a little bit specialized, but not so much that I hate it. Just a 2 mana 3/2 ward, pay 2 life is kind of good in and of itself. So, almost a 7, we'll say. Infamous Cruel Claw is 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary Weasel Mercenary with menace. Whenever the Infamous Cruel Claw deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library till you get a non-land. You may cast it by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. You get this through unblocked, then you might be able to get something nasty. But I don't know. It's going to be harder than it looks to actually plug this thing up correctly. So I'm just going to give it a 5.4. I want it to be really good, but we'll see. Hugs Grizzly Guardian is 2 red, 2 green, and X for a 5/5 legendary Badger Warrior with Trample. I just want to say, before I read anything else about this card, this is a 4 mana 5/5 Trample. Just Jism Jin with Trample. Strictly better. When Hugs Grizzly Garden enters, exile the top X, there it is, cards of your library. Till the end of your next turn, you can play those cards. End of your next turn, you can play those cards. So, scales well, draws your cards. Your 4 mana 5/5, if you want to scale it up, can draw you some cards. Wait, there's more text on this card. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Why is this card so good? This card looks fantastic to me. I'm still not sure, as cynical as I am and as power crept as we are in 2020X at this point, I don't know if this actually sees standard play, which is a really weird thing to say about a scalable card drawing 5/5 trample that also doubles your land output. How is that not good enough to see standard play? How in the world would that ever not be good enough? It's certainly not Hydroid Krasis, but good lord is it close. It really kind of is, dude. I love this card. And damn it, if it's not capable of seeing standard play, we are playing the wrong kind of Magic right now. We have power crept well beyond any reasonable capability. So I honestly think this card, I'm going to give it a 7.5. I am enamored with it. I can't stop looking at it. I cannot stop thinking in what world is this card bad? So, yikes. Moving on to Junkblade Bruiser, just a 5 mana 4/5 trample. When you expend 4, it gets +2/+1, so you get 6/6 tramps. If you expend 4, that's okay, but just okay. 3. Moira, it's actually Moira is how you pronounce this. Trash Tactician, 3 mana for a 2/4 legendary raccoon warrior. At the beginning of your first main phase, you add red or green for each raccoon you control. When you expend 4, you gain 3 life, and when you expend 8, exile the top 2 of your library till your next turn, end of your next turn. You get to play those guys. So, cool card, man. 3 mana 2/4 is uncut, downable, unboltable. That's pretty interesting. So this is going to always give you at least 1 mana every turn on a pseudo dork that's kind of tough to kill. And when you actually do use it for mana, it gains you some life. And, if you have extra raccoons out, it ramps you enough to actually legit be able to expend 8. And if you do expend 8, you get to exile 2 cards, which means that you're more likely next turn, because you'll draw a card for the turn and get 2 cards off the top of your library, then you're more likely to expend 4 again or expend 8 again. There's a lot of cool things about this card, not to mention his apparent Freddy Krueger glove that he's wearing. I've just noticed that he has fashioned some sort of Freddy Krueger glove out of trash. So, God, this guy's awesome, dude. I'm going to give him a 7.3. Stop me. Wandering Mentor is 2 mana, green-red for a 2/2 Raccoon Bard. You can tap it for red or green, and when you expend 4, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Good mana dork. Altogether, good mana dork, 5.5. Burrowguard Mentor is a green and a white for a star rabbit soldier with trample, and the PT is equal to the number of creatures that you control. Really, really cool, dude. Trample's going to help this bust through where Shauna never could, even where Regal Bunnycorn never could, even though this isn't exactly the same as Bunnycorn. Trample's going to matter tremendously in any tokens deck in Commander, but even in Standard. I think this could really, really be good, man. Like, we've got Resolute Reinforcements in Standard right now. And that's just one thing, right? We just saw that thing earlier in the video, way earlier. That's like 3 mana for 3 rabbits. That's why you want to play cards like that sometimes. You know what I mean? Play this on turn 2. Play that. Honestly, play the 1 mana rabbit on turn 1. Play this on 2, and then play the 3 mana, get 3 rabbits on turn 3. Swing 5 with this alone. It's all good. This card just is really, really cool, dude. I'm going to give it a 7.6 just because I love it so much, but it probably doesn't deserve that. Burke, Long Ear of the Law, is 6 mana for a 4/4 legendary rabbit soldier with vigilance, and when it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. How many times do you want me to say +1/+1 in the same text box, I don't like this guy very much. I really don't. 6 mana for a potential 6/6 worth of power and toughness. And then even doubling the stuff. Even doubling the stuff, I don't love. This could have effect on the table the turn it comes into play. I understand that, but it takes a lot to get me to fall for a 6 drop like this, and I haven't. So I'll give it a 4.4. A cool commander, maybe. Phineas Ace Archer is 2 mana, Selesnya colors for a 2/2 legendary rabbit archer with vigilance and reach. And when it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that's a token or a rabbit. Then if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater, draw a card. I want this to be good, but I think it actually has a hard time attacking. And like when it does attack, sure, you get a +1/+1 counter on all your other rabbits, but you might only get that one time. So you need a way to protect it or make it larger so it's more likely to survive combat. And there are ways of doing it. But does this go in the rabbits deck? Ultimately, I think so, yes. But I don't think it's the best card in the rabbits deck. I really don't. And I think you're honestly clogged up on 2 drops in that deck already. So does it even make the cut? I don't know. So I'll give the card a 5.9. Head of Homestead is 5 mana for a 3/2. When it enters, you get 2/1/1 white rabbits. So 3 guys for 5 mana. Kind of a Cloud Goat Rangery sort of style effect is what it feels like. Overall, I'm just going to give this card a 3.8. Next is Lunar Convocation, 2 mana, Orzhov colors for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, everybody loses 1 life, each opponent. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn, you get a 1/1 black bat with flying. You can pay 2 and 2 life to draw a card off this enchantment. Really sweet and standard considering we have Pain Lands and Thran Portal and all that. So should be easy enough to activate both things, gain life, lose life in a turn, and get a pretty steady stream of bats and also have like at least 1 point of incremental damage every turn. A card draw engine. It's all good. I'm not sure it's good enough in Standard, but it is kind of all good. And in Commander, there's definitely a shot this sees some play. I think this mostly has to be a rare for Limited because I think it's kind of very, very good there, especially if you can, facilitate it. You can enable it. But even outside of Limited, I think that there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. I'm going to have fun with it over the course of my Magic career. From here on out, I'm going to love this card, but I still can't judge it too highly, so I'm going to give it a 6 and leave it at that. Moonrise Cleric is 3 mana for a 2/3 bat cleric. It has flying, and when it attacks, you gain a life. Really important creature, I think, in Limited for facilitating a lot of you gain a life things for bats, right? So not bad, and it's a strictly better Windrake too. that can be cast in Orzhov or mono black or mono white, and it's not bad. So I'll give it a 3. Starseer Mentor is 5 mana for a 3/5 Bat Warlock with flying and vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, an opponent loses 3 life unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. A lot of effects like that in this set. It's kind of interesting. Forcing sort of Punisher decisions on your opponent is always kind of fun, but I think this card is mostly a limited special where it's okay. It's okay there, so I'll give it a 3. Zoraline, Cosmos Collar, my favorite animated movie, Zoraline. 3 mana, 1, a white and a black for a 3/3 legendary bat cleric with flying and vigilance, and whenever a bat you control attacks, you get yourself a life, kid. Whenever Zoraline enters or attacks, you can pay an Orzhov and 2 life. When you do, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your yard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. This is a pretty sweet Magic card. My guy. It really is. You know, this can be modal in a way. It can cost you 5 mana to play it and you get something else along with it, which I really like. Or it can just be 3 mana for a 3/3 with 2 keyword abilities, one of which is flying, and when it attacks you gain a life. So much about this is cool, right? So neat Magic card that is on the cusp of standard playability and an awesome commander too. So I like Orzhov Bats. I'm probably rating it too high, but 6.6. Alania Divergent Storm is 5 mana for a 3/5 legendary otter wizard. When you cast a spell, if it's the first instant sorcery or otter spell other than Alania you've cast this turn, you may have target opponent draw a card. If you do, copy the spell, choose new targets for the copy. Why do you have to let them draw a card on your 5 mana commander? I'm going to be a little hard on this and give it a 4. Bria, Riptide Rogue, is 4 mana for a 3/3 legendary otter rogue with prowess. Other creatures you control have prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Now we're talking baby. I like this. I don't think it's really standard playable. I think it's too much mana. And the blue-red prowess deck is going to stray as far away from 4-drops as it possibly can. But as a commander goes, you're going to be having even more fun than Bria is having in the art of this card. She's obviously having the time of her life somehow. So I'm going to give this like a 5.6. Ral, Crackling Wit, the Planeswalker of the set. 4 mana for a 4 loyalty. Whenever you cast a non-creature, put a loyalty counter on Ral. That's a really good line of text. +1, create a 1/1 otter with prowess. -3, draw 3, discard 2. -10, draw 3. You get an emblem with instants and sorceries you cast have Storm. Storm in standard. I'm not freaking out too much about it. 10's a lot to get to, even with the passive ability. 10's a lot to get to, but that passive is what I'm actually most worried about. I think the passive makes it to where like you can just choose to make a creature every turn, and then suddenly he's on like 8 loyalty before you know it. You know what I mean? But even if you -3 him, he'll be back up to 5 loyalty really fast if you're casting enough stuff. You know, you draw 3, discard 2, so draw a few instants and sorceries. Doesn't matter if he's -1, he'll be back up to 3 that turn, you know, if you have the mana for it. So I think Ral is actually pretty good. I do. I think there's multiple ways of leveraging this to actually be a decent card in standard. Better than the average 4-drop Planeswalker fare we see, if only because this static ability, this passive, keeps him on the table for longer than other Planeswalkers and makes it to where your combat math is all weird. This is one of the most interesting parts of the card because, you know, you might be able to get in on him for 4. He's got 4 or 5 loyalty. You might be able to get in on him for 4 or 5, but if your opponent casts an instance or a sorcery during your combat step while you're coming in on Ral, suddenly he stays around for longer because you messed up your combat math. Sometimes you think you've got it right and they can cast 2 spells during your combat step and put extra counters on him, and then he's still there and you wasted your whole combat step. You tapped all your creatures down. I don't know, man. I think that Ral is actually kind of sick in terms of like actual real world applications, how it plays out once it's on the table. I think this is a pretty good Magic card, and I'm going to give it a 7.4. Stormcatch Mentor is up next. This is a blue and a red for a 1/1 otter wizard with haste and prowess. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Goblin Electromancer with haste and prowess. 1 fewer point of PT, but still, Goblin Electromancer with haste and prowess is a good Magic card. Is it worth playing blue-red Slickshot in order to catch, you know, to be able to play this card? I don't know. I don't know how many cards in that deck actually cost, you know, 2 mana. Or if they do, I don't know how many of them are cost reducible, right? So how many spells in that deck are actually, besides Lightning Strike, are cost reducible with this card? I don't know. But I still think that this is just look at all those words. Look at those words and then see how much the card costs to cast. You have to give it a 6.7. You just have to. Tempest Angler is 3 mana, 1 and is it hybrids? For a 2/2 Otter Wizard, whenever you cast a non-creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Angler. Better than it looks. That's actually kind of a beast in limited. Massive, like forever prowess is beastly. So I'm going to give this 4. I'm serious. Up next is Camellia, the Seed Miser. 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary squirrel warlock with menace. Other squirrels you control have menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, you get a 1/1 green squirrel, and you can pay 2 in forage to put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel you control. Very squirrel specific card here, so super narrow. And aside from that, it's just a 3/3 menace. If you are playing squirrels, it's just okay. Like, it really is just okay, but you know, in Commander, it's cool. It's a cool commander for the Squirrels deck. So a lot of things I do like, but I can't give it more than like a 4.9 and just apologize profusely. Corpseberry Cultivator is 3 mana for a 2/3 Squirrel Warlock. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage. Whenever you forage, this guy gets a +1/+1 counter. Actually could get out of hand pretty quick. It actually could, but still just going to give this like a 2.5. Vine Reap Mentor, one of my favorite cards in this whole stinking set. This is Golgari colors for a 3/2 Squirrel Druid. When it enters or dies, you get a food token. Phenomenal Magic card. Scores higher than a lot of cards we've already talked about tonight. 7.9 for this card. I am 100% serious. I think this has a pretty good chance of actually being better than Bloodtithe Harvester by a decent margin. This is perhaps, again, I'm giving myself some leeway here. Vine Reap Mentor is perhaps the best value creature in Standard now. Day 1 Bloomburrow drops. There are good value creatures in Standard, don't get me wrong. But this little squirrel lady over here, this is potentially the actual best value creature in all of Standard. And I stand by that. Igra, Eater of All, is 5 mana for a 6/6 legendary elemental cat. Ward, Sack of Food. Sounds kind of tough, right? But here's the thing. Other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their other types and have 2 tap, sack a permanent. You gain 3 life. Whenever a food's put into your graveyard from the battlefield, Igra gets 2 +1/+1 counters. So, where do we start with this? A 5 mana 6/6. No actual keyword abilities apart from the ward. If they want to blow it up, they effectively have to sacrifice a creature, which is very good. That is so good. Some control decks won't even have a creature to sacrifice, but do keep in mind that, you know, even blue-white control has like a Mirrex token laying around, so it just doesn't have to care that much. You know what I mean? Also note that, you know, they can just pop their Mirrex tokens now and gain life, but if they do that, this does get large, so that's kind of interesting. This works really well with like Anzrag's Rampage or whatever it's called. You know, it's like destroy all of the artifacts or exile all the artifacts target player controls, right? I think it's destroy. I think it's destroy all artifacts target player controls. So you get a one-sided wrath against your opponent, and Igra gets enormous depending on how many creatures they have. That's a fun deck, and we can jund them out, but it's really a meme more than anything. I think as far as 5 creatures go, 5 mana cost creatures go in Standard, there might be better options. I like this in terms of Golgari. I like it a little bit more than the new Gitrog monster, but I kind of like it less than just Aklazats, you know? So I am going to give the card a 6.9 though. I think it's a very good Magic card. Mabel, Heir to Cragflame, is 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary mouse soldier. All your other mice get +1/+1, and when this enters, you get Cragflame, which is a legendary equipment with Equip 2. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. I don't actually think that Cragflame is a very good equipment. I don't, but at least Mabel leaves behind some really good value when she does die. She's an Anthem effect while she's here. You will play her in Boros Mice, right? You have to. So, I don't know. Altogether, not terrible, but outside the Mice deck, not great, unless Cragflame is way better than I think it is, and somehow I don't think it's better than I think it is. That's how the brain works. So, I'm going to give this card a 4.9, and again, apologize for no, we'll give it a 5.2. We'll give Mabel a 5.2. Seaglaive Mentor is 3 mana for a 3/2 mouse soldier, vigilance and haste, and it has Valiant. Whenever it Valiants, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Better than it seems, you know. A 3 mana 3-power haste is okay, just in and of itself. It also has vigilance. That ain't bad. Extra keyword abilities are good, and it grows. I mean, kind of sign me up like slightly, like a little bit. It's not terrible. I'll give it a 4.9. Next is Veteran Guard Mouse. This card is bad. 4 mana, 3/4 Mouse Soldier. When it Valiants, it gets +1/+0 and gains first strike, and you get to scry 1. 2.1. Clement the Worrywart is 3 mana, Simic colors here, for a 3/3 Legendary Frog Druid with Vigilance. And whenever it or another creature you control enters, return up to 1 target creature you control with lesser mana value to its owner's hand. Frogs you control can tap for green or blue. Spend this only to cast a creature spell, though. Pretty good in the Frogs deck, I would say. It's pretty good. Not bad. It actually triggers off of any creature entering, though. So this could get very tricky very quickly, and you have to respect effects like this. No matter what, you always have to respect stuff like this, dude. So even outside of a frog deck, it might be great, but obviously plays really well with other frogs. It can ramp you into stuff, can help you play 2 or 3 frogs even after you bounce them back to your hand in a turn. Card does an awful lot and is just a 3/3 Vigilance, too. It taps for mana, too, because, it has this ability. So kind of a sick Magic card that I'm going to give a 6.6. Dream Dew Entrancer. This is 4 mana. 2 a green and a blue for a 3/4 frog wizard with reach. And when it enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you do, if you control that creature, draw 2 cards. This is a sleeper. I actually kind of think this card is very good. Now, if you tap a Sheldred or something else that just has like a static effect on the game that's annoying, then it's not great, right? But I will say, dude, 3 stun counters is a lot for your Simic guy. 4 mana for a 3/4, effectively remove one of your opponent's creatures. Oh, and by the way, this guy has reach. Yeah, man, especially in the format where you've got a lot of frogs and other stuff that can return this back to your hand. Before the creature's stun counters are over, you play it again, get stun counters on something else, maybe eventually tap down one of your dudes. If you need to draw 2 cards, it can do that for you. This can be a 4 mana, 3/4 reach, draw 2. And that's kind of neat too. If you're just tapping down like a 1/1 token or whatever, who cares? So I actually think this card has so much play on it, and Simic doesn't get this kind of removal piece on a body very often. So excuse me for liking this card, but I'm going to give it a 6.7. This card is actually really, really good, dude. But moving on to Lily Splash Mentor. This is 4 mana for a 4/4 frog druid with reach. Pay 3 mana for its activated ability and exile another target creature you control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can only blink as a sorcery on this. Otherwise it'd be way more annoying, but still a neat card overall, especially for limited where the rate is correct and it does something the frog deck definitely wants to do. So Signpost uncommon, I'll give it a 5. Pond Prophet is the Elvish Visionary of the set, Elvish Ribbitary of the set. It's either green-green or blue-blue or blue-green for a 1/1 frog advisor. When it enters, draw a card. Solid. Super solid. You're going to be playing your frog deck all day, bouncing it back and forth to your hand, drawing cards. You feel good that you're playing Magic the Gathering. What a good game. I'm glad I picked this game up. It's so fun. I'm going to give this a 6.4 because Elvish Visionary is a very good Magic card. Balin the Haymaker is Naya colors, a red, a green, and a white for a 4/3 legendary rabbit warrior. Tap 2 untapped tokens you control to get a mana of any color, or tap 3 untapped tokens you control to draw a card, or tap 4 untapped tokens to put 3 +1/+1 counters on Balin the Haymaker. It gains trample till end of turn. You can do all of these at instant speed. You can do all of these during your opponent's combat step. You can do all of these during your opponent's end step. Absolutely silly Magic card that might make it worth adding green to Boros right now because it does something that 2 or 3 different cards in that deck do. It's just, God, this card is so good, dude. Awesome commander to brew around too. Does die to bolts and lightning strikes and stuff, and I honestly could not care. This can do a lot in terms of the possibility of it doing something when it comes into play. If you Gleeful Demolition on 2 and then play this card on 3, it can draw a card. Just tap the Gleeful Demolition tokens. Who cares? So, and there's a lot more ways to get it to draw a card than just that. So, I don't know, man. I think that this card is kind of busted and broken, and I'm going to give it not a score that would denote that it's broken. Since it is like, 3 colors, it does die to bolt. Like there are some things that take off, bits of its score, but I'm still going to give it an overall 7. This card is good. It may have work to do in standard, but if nothing else, good commander. Helga, a card that I'm coming around on. Bant colors, green, white, blue for a 1/3 legendary frog druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card, gain a life, put a +1/+1 counter on Helga. You can tap Helga to add X mana of any one color, where X is Helga's power. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells, mana value 4 or greater, or creature spells with X in their mana cost. So the number of things you can actually cast by tapping down Helga are pretty limited. They really, really are. I also wish that it wasn't just creature spells. If it were just cast spells with 4 or greater mana cost, then maybe, but you're mostly going to play this in a mid-range creature deck where it can give you card advantage. It can get larger. The moment it does get larger, you can't cut it down. I do think there are plays in standard where, say I'm 4 colors, and this is just one example. I play Helga, and then the next turn I'm untapped. My opponent tries to kill it somehow. I can flash in Urtai. Look at that. I can flash in Urtai, kill one of your guys with the Urtai ability, and while Urtai's on the stack, right, I cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater. So Helga gets a counter, cut down fizzles. I now have an Urtai. Your guy's dead. Doesn't that seem like a good play? If you can flash in a 4-drop when they do target it with cut down, that seems like you've got it made. But those are going to be few and far between, those opportunities. But I will say gaining a life is good gravy. Getting a little bit larger is good gravy. And the sort of up the beanstalk value of drawing a card is unbelievable. So maybe I was a little bit too hard on this card when I first saw it, but I still have a hard time loving it. So I am going to give it kind of a tentative 6.5, but I will note that this has a chance of being one of the most important mid-range creatures in the format come rotation. But Glarb looks like it could also do that. This is a black, a green, and a blue, so Sultai colors for a 2/4 3-drop. It's a legendary frog wizard noble with death touch. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast spells with mana value 4 or greater from the top of your library, and tap it to Surveil 2 in case you needed to do more, right? So if there's not something cool on top of your library, this is one of the few effects like this that on the same card as the effect letting you do this, you can stack your library differently. That's really, really important, I think. And this is a 3-drop that doesn't die to cut down, doesn't die to bolt, is a 4 toughness creature with death touch, like we've already seen on Preacher of the Schism, that is a really important line. 4 toughness, death touch guy, almost always at least halfway decent. So in your Sultai deck, this, by the way, these 2 cards work together. Yes, these two cards on screen, Helga and Glarb, they do work together. Gotta point it out. But I think Glarb is overall probably the better card. It doesn't outright draw you cards like Helga does, but kind of puts an extra card in your hand. Right? And this one is lands. Unlike Helga, it's an extra card type it can cast. And it's just spells. It's not creature spells with mana value 4 or greater, just spells, which is amazing. Tap to Surveil 2 at the end of your opponent's turn or after it blocks. Good Lord. I'm telling you, this card's okay. You just got to fit it into a deck, and I think it's easy enough to do that. So, but in Sultai, you do have Preacher of the Schism. You do have Sentinel of the Nameless City. How many 3-drop creatures do you need? So, it's hard to say, but I do think this guy is awesome. So I'm going to give this guy like a 7.7, and I mean it. We are at artifacts, guys. That means we're rounding the corner. We are rounding the corner, dude. All right. That's more or less the end of my coffee. I'm actually going to swig the very last bit. We are going to charge home, baby. Bark Form Harvester is 3 mana for a 2/3 artifact creature. It's a shapeshifter with Changeling and Reach. You can pay 2 to put a card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Kind of want to review this at the same time as the Scarecrow thing. I wonder where that's going to come in. An artifact creature that is also a shapeshifter. I had somebody in my comments section the other day say that these cards are important because for a combo deck in Commander, they claim it's a very real combo deck in CEDH, that you need an artifact creature dwarf. And this is an artifact creature that is also a dwarf for that deck. And so is the other card like this in the set. So apparently these are somewhat important for a CDH combo to actually pop off. And I guess that's an extremely narrow app, but it is what it is. This card's not terrible though for shoring up, limited strategies. But altogether, I'm going to say that this is a 4.5. I'm serious, 4.5 for this. Bumbleflower Sharepot is 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters, create a food token. You can also pay 5, tap it, and sack it to destroy a non-land permanent at sorcery speed. That's really not bad. It's really not terrible. You get 2 artifacts when it ETBs, and you can sack it to blow up anything. Like, who cares if it's sorcery speed? Some will. But altogether, man, I'm going to give this card a 5. Fountain Port Bell is a single mana for an artifact. When it enters, search your library for a basic, reveal it, shuffle, put the card on top. You can also pay 1 and sack the bell to draw a card. So draw the land, or on future turns, draw a card, period. Card is strong. Card is actually reasonably strong. So I'm going to give it a 5.5. Card is okay. Heirloom Epic is 1 mana for an artifact. Pay 4, tap, draw a card at sorcery speed. For each mana in this ability's activation cost, you can tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay the mana. So you can convoke the cost, but again, only at sorcery speed, which is so bad. Like, card is so bad, dude. So I don't know. I feel like I have to give this like a 2.1 because yikes. At least it's a 1 mana guy, you know? Oh God, did I go back? Did I go back? We've seen all these cards. I know some of these words. Huh, that's very weird. Okay, Patchwork Banner, I guess, is next. This is 3 mana for an artifact. When it enters, choose a creature type. Creatures you control the chosen type get +1/+1. Tap, add a mana of any color. Amazing commander card. I've already seen like 4 different commander people I follow on Twitter be like, this is going in every single deck I own. So, you know, I wasn't crazy. I saw a couple people in my comments being like, it's not that good in commander. And then I had a few people on Twitter like really reaffirm my position. This actually, yes, this is incredibly playable. There's a knight card. Maybe it's called Herald's Banner. If I'm misremembering, I'm not sure. But it's 3 mana for a rock that taps for a mana of any color, and it gives all your knights +1/+0 or something like that. And that card's good in knights. So this card's good in everything that doesn't already have an overabundance of commander anthem effects, you know? So I like it. I'm going to give it a 6. Starforged Sword is 4 mana for an artifact. It is an equipment. You can gift a tapped fish. This equips for 3. Equipped creature gets +3/+3 and loses flying. When it enters, if the gift was promised, attach sword to a creature you control. I really want to call this the worst card in the entire set. I really do. And I want to keep making Little Mermaid jokes. Heck of a snarf, blat. But like, this card's so bad. It's so bad. But, however, there are a number of unblockable creatures in blue in this set, or creatures that can go unblocked once certain conditions are met. And Starforged Sword is okay to play for 4 mana and immediately strap on those guys and deal a bunch more damage. That's what it's for in Limited. That's the only thing it's for. This card gets a 1. It will be the only one in the set, I think. Sword of Vengeance, not in the set, but it kind of is, but it's not available in boosters. It's in the starter decks. Sword of Vengeance gets a 4. Tangle Tumbler was the actual name of this card the whole time. 3 mana for a 6/6 vehicle with vigilance. You can pay 3, tap it, gets a +1/+1 counter on a thing. Tap 2 untapped tokens you control to have this become an artifact creature. So that's how you crew it, by tapping 2 untapped tokens. 3 mana 6/6 vigilance, tap 2 clues. Is this better than it looks? Tell you what, everybody. Haven't done it in a while. I think I've only done it once tonight. If you're still here, and apparently there's a lot more of you here now than there were earlier. Chat, rate Tangle Tumbler for me. I'll give you 20, 30 seconds. Chatterino, give me the 4/1/1 on Tangle Tumbler. What is this card? What do you guys think this card is? Pausing for a break. Is it a big mistake? I'm just pausing for a break. Let's see what chat rates Tangle Tumbler. Is it a bumbling piece of crap card, or is it actually more than a trap card? 5.5, 4, 6.5, and a 4 and a 5, 5.55, 5.5, 8.5, 6.2, 5.5, 7, 1.6, 4.5, 4, 6, 2, 4.64. We got a 6 over here. So extremely wide spread of things. 2.5, limited 3.1 by user ID killer. We got sick over here. It's 3.14, pie memes over here by Erwin Dadwagon. I see you over here. 6 people are saying piloting this with food tokens seems okay. Yes, it does. I think that the people in chat saying like 5 point whatever are probably the closest, but I don't know. Realistically, I think I just give it a 5. I just throw it a 5, baby. Limited 10, anywhere else 1.3. Somebody else said 6. So, again, massive spread. Apparently, a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this card, which is part of the reason I threw it to the chat. I'm just going to give it a 5. I'm going to settle on a 5. 3-Tree Mascot is the 2-mana artifact creature with Changeling in the set. It's 2-mana, 2/1. You can filter a mana, but you can only do that one turn. Once per turn, baby. Filtering mana is way too broken. I'm not going to go through this whole shtick again, but why is it only once each turn? This, however, does happen to be a 2-mana Changeling artifact creature, and that is just good. That's just kind of good. 5.1. I'm serious. Like slightly above average. That's not bad. Lands. Okay. Lupin Flower Village. Lupin the Third is a land. You can tap it for a colorless. You can also tap it for a white mana, but you can spend that only to cast a creature. You can also pay 1 and a white and tap it and sack it to look at the top 6 of your library, reveal a bat, bird, mouse, or rabbit from among them, put that thing into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. This is a good Magic card. Does not come into play tapped. Always taps for mana. Taps for a colored mana if you actually want to cast a creature spell. That's insane considering it came into play untapped. And there's more. My God, at instant speed, you can get card selection off of it. What else do you want in a land? These are all good, but some are better than others. And I feel like, you know, a land that can get you any of these rabbits in the set that are good. It can get you a Regal Bunnycorn off the top. It can get you a Deep Cavern Bat off the top, which is the most important thing it gets. In red-white, it's in red-white aggro. It comes into play untapped, and it can get a mouse. Like, good card, dude. Good card. It's so good. I'm going to give this particular village a 7.9. I love this thing so much, dude. Lily Pad Village, the blue one, taps for a blue. You can tap it for a blue to cast creatures, or you can pay a blue, tap it, and surveil 2. Activate only if a bird, frog, otter, or rat entered under your control this turn. By the way, note that says entered the battlefield. Entered the battlefield, not entered under your control, but just entered. So that's. This one's slightly worse because, you know, you have to actually play a thing. You can't just get card selection off of it and it comes into play untapped. That white one is nuts. But this one's still okay. It is still okay. So, but also blue lands don't want to cast creature spells too often as much. So 6.8. Mudflat Village is the black one. You can tap it for black to cast a creature spell or colorless mana. You can also pay 1 on a black, sack it to return a bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel from your yard to your hand. Busted magic card. Get back Vine Lash, whatever it's called. The thing that, get back Iridescent, whatever it's called. Vine Lasher, the 1 mana black creature with landfall, deal a damage to them. Get back your Deep Cavern Bat. Get back your Lord Skitter. Get back your 2 mana squirrel guy that makes a food when he comes into play and dies. Look at all that. In your Golgari deck, is it embarrassing to play any of those cards? In Golgari, Deep Cavern Bat, Iridescent Vine Lasher, Lord Skitter, 2-drop squirrel guy. That's a really good base of creatures right there that can all come back with a village. And like getting back a bat, especially a Deep Cavern Bat with a Mudflat Village, that sounds incredible, dude. So again, dude, like 7.9. 7.9 all day, baby. This is really, really good. Rockface Village taps for red to cast a creature. It also taps for a colorless. You can pay a red and tap it to have target lizard, moose, otter, or raccoon get +1/+0 till end of turn and gain haste. You can only do it at sorcery speed, but that's fine. This is still just a single mana and is in a color that mostly casts creature spells, right? But it's a single mana for, you know, haste on whatever you played this turn if you have the right creature types in your deck. And I think that's very good too. So, sorry, burp. I'm going to give this a 7.5. Oak Hollow Village is the green one and final one. You can tap this for a colorless or a green to cast a creature spell. Pay a green and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control enter the battlefield this turn. Crazy with Chatterstorm, right? But like, okay, in the rabbit stack, if you play more than one rabbit and you have like mana left over. Same thing with frogs. Interesting in frogs because of a lot of, you know, almost no matter what turn it is, frogs could be entering the battlefield because this frog's bouncing the other frog and you're replaying the frog and all that. So kind of cute. And one of those that if you do have the right creature types, it's just one of those you might as well play. So 7.4 for this one. Fabled Passage is a reprint, but I'm still going to give Fabled Passage a solid 8. Very good Magic card. Fountain Port is a land that taps for colorless. You can pay 2, tap it, sack a token to draw a card. Or you can pay 3, tap it, pay a life to make a 1/1 fish. Or you can pay 4, tap to create a treasure token. I had somebody in my comments say, hey, I'm a control player here, and I would never play Fountain Port. Well, guess what? I'm a control player too. I would play Fountain Port. Our opinions cancel each other out. I do think that, first of all, when it does come to the control players in the community, like CGB, this card's going to get played in control. He's going to play this card in control. And I know he's just like a YouTuber type, whatever. It's not really up to him whether this card sees play in blue-white control, but I would actually bet like 50 cents this card sees one of play in blue-white control, because why not? Why not, dude? Sack a Mirex token, sack a clue, sack a treasure, sack a whatever to draw a card. You know, it's literally the same thing as sacking a clue, so I guess that doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you just sack the clue? But still, you can sack various tokens to draw cards, and sacking a Mirex token to draw is actually kind of an enormous freaking deal just in and of itself. But obviously, the ability to create a blocker or create just board presence in general on the same card that also lets you draw cards, like, this is all good. You can even cash in the fish for drawing a card later. That's cool. So I don't know, dude. I think it's a one-of for sure in certain control decks. And I also think it's a land that most Commander players will pack a copy of. I don't know if it's in every Commander deck, but I think a lot of Commander decks just fold this card into the mix and call it a day. So I'm going to give this an 8. Same as Fabled Passage. I just think that there's almost no reason not to play this if you're not in like 3 colors. You know what I mean? But Hidden Grotto is up next. Reprint. Nah, is this a reprint? I don't know the Hidden Grotto is. Hidden Grotto is when it enters to Surveil 1. There's one that we just got a few sets ago that scries 1. This is just strictly better. When it enters Surveil 1, tap, add colorless, pay 1, tap it, add a mana of any color. So we also got to see Conduit Pylons in the last set, an untapped land that produces colorless and surveils when it comes into play. I got very excited about that card. It did nothing, but still got plenty of time to keep doing stuff in Standard. The more lands you have that just surveil when they come into play, the better. Now we can play 8 of them that don't come into play tapped. This card is deceptively good, and I'll give it a 7, 100% serious. Oh my god, it's 3 Tree City. Let's do Uncharted Haven first and end on a really strong card. Uncharted Haven is a reprint, apparently, and even if it weren't a reprint, it's been functionally reprinted under the same name multiple times. This card, enters tap, choose a color, tap, add a mana of the chosen color. Good for shoring up that third, like, splashed color in draft, right? So I don't know. I'll give it a 4.9. 3 Tree City, though. Last card of the set. We made it, everybody. Legendary land. When it enters, choose a creature type. Tap for a colorless. Or pay 2 and tap it and choose a color. Add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. So you need 4 mana to actually, 4 creatures to really generate actual mana value off of this. And that shouldn't be too hard, you know, in certain tokens decks. Or just, you know, you put this in elves. If you're playing Commander, you put it in every tribal deck, like, period, sorry. But every, like, Creature Type Matters deck, you throw it in, no matter what. And even in some decks where a creature type doesn't quite matter, but you just incidentally in your Commander deck, you know, you've got 65 non-land slots. 30 of those cards are creatures, right? Let's just say 30 of those cards are creatures. It might be more. And it just turns out, even though you didn't mean to do this, that 22 of those cards are creatures, or are humans. Just happen to be humans out of your 30 guys. So, you know, 3 Tree City. Like, even if you're not, again, in like a dedicated deck where like you're in a theme, creature type matters. So I do like that. I think that's cool. But again, mostly in Commander where you've got a lot of theme decks popping off, and, you know, especially when you get down to elves. I just keep bringing up elves, but God, this is ridiculous in elves. But, you know, it's good in rabbits. It's good in bats. It's good in like every little creature type deck you can possibly imagine. This is effectively a Nykthos. Very, very good. I will say Nykthos is always going to be better than this because, you know, it's a lot more easy to play a bunch of different kinds of cards that aren't the same creature type or whatever. And Devotion tends to count up faster than this ability does because, you know, you might have a creature that, or an enchantment even, that makes your Devotion to black 3. You might have an Underworld Dreams, and that like gives you more Devotion to black all in one card. Whereas, one card will only ever give you 1 mana with this card. So I'm not going to go off and say it's better than Nykthos or as good as Nykthos, but it is definitely a big mana land that it's going to play so much, so much playing Commander until the end of time. This is going to be worth some money if I had to bet. But even in standard, in the right kind of creature type deck, yes. Yeah, absolutely. This can generate like 4 mana for you if you have enough creatures out, but it's kind of tough to make it happen. But easily one of the more noteworthy, if not better, but one of the more noteworthy cards in the entire set that we're going to be playing until our grandchildren are gone. So get used to 3-Tree City and Commander. You're going to be seeing it. This card is a 7.9, and I'm only giving it a 7.9 because of the narrowness of it. You have to play creatures and all that. This card is apparently $35 on pre-order right now. And like $50 if you want to get a special seasonal version of it. That's it, baby. We did it. I don't know that I ever actually pressed record. So yeah, I actually have to just download the VOD now, which will take forever, but it doesn't matter. That's all the cards in the set, dude. 3 hours, 47 minutes. I think we started at about 30 minutes. So 3 hours, 15 for the whole run, just give or take. That's pretty good. That's pretty good, dude. That's not bad. What a card to jump in the stream on. Yeah, RT111, the last card. It's 3-Tree City. Oh, man, that was actually pretty good in terms of like total time. I think we did all right, dude. We got out of here before midnight. I didn't expect that to happen, dude. Yeah, a lot of people missed most of it too. I'm so sorry. I don't know if the set is just absolutely amazing, which I think it is. But I think the 10-point system has made Dev rate all the cards higher than it used to. Not complaining though. I agree a lot of these cards are great. Well, if I give a card a 5, that means it was a 2.5 on the old system. If I give a card a 7, it was like a 3.5 or something on the old system. So maybe I'm rating cards slightly higher, but I tend to think like if it's slightly above average, 5.1, slightly below average, 4.9, and we just kind of go from there. And I think there are a lot of slightly above average cards in this set. And more than above average for that matter. We got the appropriate number of like limited cards and stuff like that. And I think the limited environment looks really good. This set's a home run. I don't want to spend too much time because you've already been with me for 4 hours, right? But I think that like in terms of what the limited environment looks like, how it's going to affect standard, how it's going to affect other formats, how it's going to affect Commander, like just they somehow pleased all of the people with it, except for like, the 3 guys that you literally cannot please no matter what you do. I've seen them. They're in my comments, but the last 3 or 4 sets, there were a lot more people in my comment section talking about this set looks stupid and I hate it. It's like this set a lot of people are like super on board with. What dot life? Thanks for the 500 bits. I will get to what all happened during this stream in a second. I will say your names, but I'm going to wait and get off the YouTube part of the video real quick. So if you are watching on YouTube, my God, you've made it. That was half your workday. How do you do it? Thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Just remember, I have a Patreon. If you want to reward this extremely hard work, I will take your money. It's just $1. It's just $1 a month. I would appreciate the support quite a bit. And if you do offer the support, you get to vote on what decks we do first for Bloomburrow Standard. And I know you're excited. I know you want to vote. Just $1 a month, patreon.com/SBMTG. You can also join us here live on Twitch for all kinds of stuff, gameplay, seeing decks, whatever. Twitch.tv/SBMTGdev. And thanks for the follow. Kiss for Kink. That's a good name. But anyway, guys, if you are watching on YouTube, thanks for just the watch time at this point. I appreciate it. But that's all I got for this one, guys. I got to get out of here both on YouTube and Twitch so I can get the video up. And these people have just about had enough of me, I'm sure, anyway. So I love you very much. Just do the YouTube stuff on your way out. Sub to the sandwich. Reward the hard work. And I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm donezo for this one, though. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Twitch people, stay on for a second. YouTube people, spread love and be kind.